The story begins with a heavy thought: you only get one shot at life, even if it ends full of regrets. That's why our protagonist is determined to make his next life better. This time, he wants to live without carrying any regrets. He suddenly finds himself standing in front of two kids, a boy and a girl. The boy is desperately begging for help, while the protagonist just stands there, staring, tense and unsure of what to do. The crowd around them starts whispering all kinds of things, even calling him a monster for letting children beg like that. He suspects he might be a transmigrator, especially since fragments of his past life resurface from time to time. This world feels strangely familiar, almost identical to a popular game called Bright Fantasy. He doesn't know much about it, he only bought it after seeing a friend play but never actually opened it. All he remembers is that it's a command-based RPG set in a bright world of swords, magic, and multiple heroines. The protagonist of the game is named Isuka, but Gray, our protagonist, isn't the hero. Instead, he's reincarnated as a side character with such an intimidating face that he's often mistaken for a bandit, or something worse. With no real idea of his role in the game's story, he simply shrugs it off. Adventure life, here we go. In this world, being an adventurer is considered an honorable profession. They gather at the guild daily for quests, and their ranks go from E to A, with sublevels in between. It's a bit of a hassle, but Gray has managed to work his way up to B rank, no small achievement. To reach B rank, you need 3 consecutive C rank quest completions, something Gray achieved with solid swordsmanship and a wide range of magic, attack spells, healing, buffs, debuffs, you name it. He's confident he can hold his own, and at the very least, not die too easily. But right now, his attention is on the 2 kids in front of him. The crowd is getting louder, with people speculating that the children might be up for sale or calling for guards to step in. Gray grows more nervous, feeling their judgment press on him just because of his intimidating appearance. The girl explains that they're there because they need help. They have a sick family member who needs healing, and she asks Gray to use his magic. Earlier, the boy had offered a flower to a man, only to be kicked aside and told the flowers were junk. That was when Gray stepped in, kicked the man in the face, knocked him down, and agreed to buy the flower. Afterward, he used his recovery magic on the kids. When Gray asks if they have any family, they shake their heads, they're on their own, and one of them is seriously ill. He quickly realizes that his recovery magic only heals physical wounds, while true healing magic exists only among church priests. Still, he reassures them, insisting it's not a big deal. The kids stare at him in disbelief, but he simply shrugs and agrees to see their friend, even though he isn't sure he can actually help. He wonders if his healing potions will even work. The boy nervously mentions they can't pay him, but Gray brushes it off, telling them they can repay him whenever they're able. The kids were so overwhelmed by his kindness that they really burst to tears. Gray doesn't quite understand why they're so emotional until the boy explains it's because someone is finally treating them kindly. The girl adds that they're just children trying to survive. Gray tells them to calm down, already deciding that he has to help them no matter what. As they start walking toward the house, the boy realizes they haven't introduced themselves yet. Gray casually gives his name, joking about how it isn't obvious he's an adventurer. The boy introduces himself as Isuka, and the girl as Fio. Gray nods, but inside, his thoughts start racing. The name Isuka stands out. It's the name of the game's protagonist. Gray can't help thinking that being reborn as a villain-type character and getting involved with the main cast might bring all kinds of trouble. Normally he'd avoid them, but since he doesn't actually know the story, he decides to simply follow his conscience, even if it ends up leading to his death. He'd rather live without regrets. After reaching a rundown, crumbling house on the outskirts of the slums, Isuka goes inside to explain the situation. Fio stays outside and thanks Gray over and over. He tells her to thank him after he's done with the treatment. Gray then warns her not to trust people so easily, he could very well be a bad person too. She simply says she believes in him, which makes him unexpectedly happy. She mistakes his grin for a frown, but he assures her that it's just his usual expression. Isuka returns and thanks Gray for waiting, then gestures for him to come in. Inside, Gray sees 3 more kids and a woman. Isuka motions toward the sick girl. Fio asked if he can heal her. He says he'll try. He's greeted by an older girl, Ariamel, who's taking care of 2 younger kids, Lutz and Nina. The sick one is Stella Chan. One look is enough for Gray to understand the problem. Stella is a vampire. Her red eyes, pale skin, and small fangs make it obvious. She's probably a half-vampire, which is an even bigger issue, since both humans and pure-blooded vampires discriminate against them. Gray tells them she isn't sick, just malnourished. The air in the room turns heavy. He figures that when vampires lack nutrients, they crave blood, yet strangely, she hasn't attacked any of the kids. He concludes she's simply unaware of her own bloodlust. The fix is simple, she just needs proper nutrients. He stands and asks what they usually eat. Isuka says they sometimes eat church bread, but only when they manage to sell flowers. Gray apologizes and tells him to forget it. He knows church food only comes once a week and is probably the best meal these kids get. He reassures them they'll be fine and tells them he'll provide food for an entire month. The kids stare at him in disbelief. Isuka asks if he's really sure, while Theo says they can't accept so much. Gray cuts them off, asking if they want help or not. He explains that magic can't cure Stella's condition, but proper meals can, regular eating and a balanced diet. They're overwhelmingly grateful, and Gray decides to head to the market. As he walks, he reflects that abandoning the kids would haunt him with regrets. With a mischievous grin, he thinks about how unfortunate they are to trust him. They'll become sacrifices to satisfy his conscience. He also notices something off about their overall health, so he decides to add fruits and bread to their meals for the day. Suddenly, a group approaches, led by a bald man dressed in black. He asks Gray if he's also keeping an eye on the kids in the cabin. Gray's temper snaps, he grabs the man's wrist and slams his head into the ground. The already nervous thugs are now completely terrified of him. Gray growls that he doesn't know what they were planning, but it's not happening under his watch. Moments later, the intruders are sprawled out, injured. Gray warns one of them that if they even think about touching the kids, he'll feed them to the harpies. Those creatures will chew them slowly, starting with their toes up so they don't die easily. The terrified boy stammers, and Gray figures his point has gotten across. Pressing the leader's head into the dirt, Gray demands to know how they found him. The boy stutters, saying he thought Gray was after the same thing. Gray scoffs, telling him not to judge a book by its cover. After delivering one more well-earned punch, he leaves. On his way back, he thinks about how this world doesn't even have proper schools. Later, he returns to Bosto, the city he calls home. He notices the massive Adventurers Guild building where quests are posted, each with rewards matching their difficulty. It's an easy place for professional adventurers like him to live in, since it sits on the route to the capital and other countries. The large population also attracts plenty of bandits, like the ones Eriamelier, who consider themselves part of the underground guild. Gray buys some bread, thinking that since he doesn't have a team, he gets to keep all the quest rewards for himself, which makes covering the kids' meals no problem. When he returns, he announces that it's time to cook. The kids stare at him in surprise. He doesn't exactly look like someone who knows how to handle a kitchen. Isuka panics and insists he didn't mean it that way. Emo offers to help light the fire, while Gray catches Lutz eyeing an apple and ruffles his hair, telling him to wait. Ariamel notices this and quietly takes Nina and Lutz aside. Gray can't help noting how surprisingly well-behaved these kids are, especially for slum dwellers. He decides not to dig too deeply into their situation for now. Simple recipes should be enough. Then Nina tugs on his clothes. Gray looks down and tells her to stay still and wipe her nose, but instead she calls him Dad. He freezes. He knows she's mistaken, but a small part of him wonders if denying it right away would make her sad. Before he can figure out what to say, Ariamel calls Nina over and gently scolds her for bothering him. Gray is left unsure of how to respond. Soon they're all gathered at the table, and Ariamel announces that the food is ready. Gray isn't sure how he ended up eating with them, but here he is. Isuka compliments the meal, and Fu scolds him for talking with his mouth full. The two younger kids are making a mess, and Gray feels a strange warmth settle over him in the middle of the chaos. He wipes the children's faces, watching as Nina happily thanks Dada. Ariamel picks up Stella and feeds her slowly, reminding her not to rush. Gray notices the kids look a bit livelier and comments that Stella's energy seems to be returning. Ariamel tells Gray she'll take care of the cleaning, and he agrees. Isuka thanks him for the meal, and Fio adds that it was really delicious. Gray brushes it off, thinking things will work themselves out with time. He mentions he needs to head home, but Nina doesn't want him to leave. She hugs him tightly and hands him a small doll. Gray takes it, unsure what he's supposed to do with it. Ariamel apologizes and tries explaining to Nina that Gray has his own home, but Nina refuses to let go. Gray chuckles and says it's fine, kids are like that. And besides, it's getting close to their bedtime anyway, so he decides to stay until they fall asleep. His mind drifts to his past life. His sister telling him goodbye. His mom telling him to take care. His dad reminding him he's already in high school. The last words he remembers are, "See you later." The next morning, Gray carries a bundle of food, thinking it should stay fresh long enough. He figures he'll stick to simple meals for now and start buying better quality meat once he earns more. When he arrives, he sets the food down, and the kids are amazed. They look through the recipes and menu ideas he brought. Gray tells them he won't be able to visit every day, so they should eat well while they can. Ariamel asks if he'd like to look around, but the others are still asleep. Gray suddenly feels like a dad about to leave on a business trip. He sees the 3 kids sleeping soundly. Ariamel asks if he slept well too, admitting that Nina's tantrum might have bothered him, but he waves it off. It's nothing. Ariamel looks relieved. Then Isuka hesitantly asks if they'll see Gray again. Gray nods. He's got a plan. It's time to start making money. Later, an old orc is running for his life, muttering that he can't win. He already knows it. He's terrified, insisting that man isn't human. Humans are supposed to be weak, mere cattle, yet all his subordinates were killed instantly, their heads sliced off like nothing. He keeps repeating that the guy isn't human. Gray steps out with a wicked grin. The orc panics, wondering why Gray is pointing a sword at his midsection. Gray asked if their game of tag is over. Casually, he adds that there's something he wants to buy, so he'll need to take something from the orc for the bounty. The scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where Gray is scanning the mission board. An extermination request for an elder orc catches his eye, and he thinks it's a decent match for him. As he's looking it over, he overhears some staff members talking about a guy with a twisted sense of humor, someone who, according to rumors, has supposedly committed every crime imaginable: assault, blackmail, theft. The whole list. Gray snorts inwardly. If that were even half true, the guild would have revoked his license long ago. Just then, a familiar voice calls out. A guy strolls over, teasing Gray for choosing an extermination job. Gray recognizes him immediately, Gannis, one of the few people he finds truly irritating. Gannis starts poking fun at Gray's cold personality and even brings up rumors about him threatening kids in the slums. Gray ignores it, knowing Gannis only shows up to bother him because he's still bitter about Gray rejecting his team invitation. Gannis then brags about reaching B rank faster than Gray did. Gray fires back with a snarky comment about remembering where you came from. Gannis huffs and points out a low-tier goblin extermination job, but Gray gets tense. Goblins are way too low rank for him to even touch. The banter spirals, Gannis gets more worked up, and his subordinates struggle to calm him down. Gray leaves the commotion behind and heads to the counter to register for the orc mission. Sasha, the receptionist, lets out a sigh at their childish argument but still walks him through the mission details. An old orc was spotted near a poor village, and the payout is lower than normal because the villagers simply can't offer more. Sasha recommends forming a temporary team, but Gray turns it down. He knows very well that no one wants to team up with him anyway. He gets ready to head out, thinking he should finish the job quickly. Before he leaves, Sasha thanks him and assures him that no one at the guild actually believes the rumors about him. Gray shrugs it off. His mind drifts to the valuable parts of the orc he can sell. Apparently they're powerful aphrodisiacs, and nobles will pay a fortune for them. Sasha just shakes her head, wondering what kind of nonsense runs through Gray's mind. Cut to the village. The village chief is overjoyed that Gray accepted the mission despite the low reward. He introduces Marina, a village girl, and suggests she accompany Gray for the night as compensation. Marina, terrified but pressured by duty, nervously steps into Gray's room. Gray immediately notices her fear and reassures her that she doesn't have to stay. He explains that while some adventurers might take advantage of the offer, he's not that kind of man. He tells her to get some rest and promises to complete the mission so the village can go back to normal. Relieved, Marina apologizes and wishes him good night. As she walks away, she realizes Gray might actually be a decent person. She returns to the chief, who hurriedly asks what happened. She tells him Gray said he didn't need her but would still handle the mission. The old man sighs in relief, just glad she's unharmed. The next morning, Marina brings Gray a small snack, hoping he'll like it. She knocks and apologizes for the awkwardness from the night before. Gray brushes it aside and thanks her before eating. He compliments the snack, though Marina downplays it shyly. Once he's done, he prepares to set out. The villagers gather around, urging him to be careful. He's the only hope they have. Marina adds softly that they're all counting on him. With a final wave, Gray departs. Back in the present, an orc is sprinting through the forest, panic twisting his features. He mutters frantically about running, escaping Gray at all costs, terrified for both his life and his dignity. Before he gets far, a sword whistles through the air and slices off his arm. The orc lets out a blood-curdling scream as Gray steps forward, telling him to say his final prayers, mockingly calling him Old Orc. Gray even jokes about deciding whether to take his head first or his more delicate parts. After finishing the job, Gray collects everything he needs, loading the materials into his high-class magic bag. These bags are rare, but he bought one back when he still had a team. Thanks to it, he doesn't have to carry gruesome trophies in his hands, though he's not thrilled about having them in his bag either. But work is work. When he returns to the village, the people are already gathered, anxiously awaiting news. Gray announces that the orc is dead and the forest is safe again. The old man thanks him for his hard work, but when Gray presents the orc's severed head as proof, the villagers recoil in horror. Definitely more than they needed to see. Marina gathers her courage and asks if he'll stay the night, saying she had planned to cook for him. Gray politely declines, saying he needs to head out soon. He apologizes, and although she looks a bit disappointed, she says she understands. The villagers thank him once more and wish him a safe journey. Later, as Gray rides in a carriage, he reflects on how smoothly everything has been going. His long-term plan is finally coming together, and he's close to making his dream home a reality. It's been a while since he started living in Bastok, and while the inn has been comfortable, it's time for him to settle down properly. He smirks to himself, thinking about how the old orc's family jewels will probably end up helping some noble households secure their lineage. His quiet laughter makes the other passengers shift away from him. The next day, Gray is back at the inn in Bastok, carefully stitching up Nina's worn-out doll. He hopes she'll be happy to see it fixed, but the fabric is so old that it'll probably fall apart again soon. Deciding he needs something more durable, he heads to a shop to find out if alchemy can restore it. The shopkeeper recognizes him right away and comments on how Gray just returned but is already preparing to leave again. He jokes that it must be for a woman, maybe a little romance after a post-mission meeting. But before he can continue with his stories, Gray calls out for Lena, the innkeeper's daughter, and told her that his father is doing it again. A voice from upstairs fires back, and Lena, the innkeeper's daughter, begins scolding her father for bothering guests with his stories. The old man tries to defend himself, but Lena calls him an idiot to his face, insisting that men should stick together. Gray only shrugs, saying he was about to leave anyway. Lena assures him she'll manage her father and wishes him a great day. Gray takes a moment to appreciate the inn: clean rooms, good food, polite staff. If it weren't for the old man, he thinks, the place would probably be thriving. Later, at the alchemy workshop, Lux immediately assumes Gray is there because of the doll. With a smirk, Lux teases that such an old ragged toy doesn't seem fitting for someone like him. Gray ignores the jab and asks about getting it properly restored. Lux confirms alchemy can do it, but there will be a price. Before Gray can ask how much, Lux reveals he has a client who's particularly interested in old orc parts. When Gray casually reveals the orc's head, Lux recoils in horror, insisting he didn't mean for him to bring that back. But Gray already knows what Lux truly wants: the orc's crystal ball. With a smirk, Gray admits he took one of the orc's jewels but says he's willing to overlook Lux's reaction. After all, if the deal goes well, Lux is the type who'd slip him a free healing potion. Besides, as long as the kid is happy, Gray doesn't care much about what he gets out of it. When Gray returns, Nina rushes straight at him, calling for her daddy. Ariamel, standing beside her, quickly apologizes and explains that Nina cried a lot after he left. Gray kneels down and hugs her gently, reassuring her that she doesn't need to cry. He's here now, and look, Stella is here too. Stella beams, calls him dad as well, and playfully tells him to comfort Nina properly. Seeing how energetic and cheerful she is again gives Gray a quiet sense of relief. He apologizes for making Nina wait so long, then pulls out the doll and hands it to her. Her eyes sparkle immediately, and she practically bounces in place as she admires how beautiful it looks. The whole room seems to brighten with her excitement, and everyone relaxes at the sight of her happiness. Ariamel, watching the moment unfold, thanked Gray sincerely, though she struggles to express how grateful she is. Gray brushes it off, saying it's nothing, and suggests they all head inside to eat. Ariamel tells Nina she can go play with Theo, but Gray says she can stay right where she is, it's fine. Beaming, Nina settles onto Gray's lap as everyone sits down for the meal. Gray notices Isuka asking Fu to eat his mushrooms for him. To Gray, Isuka looks just like any ordinary kid, completely unaware that he's fated to become the hero who will save the world. The thought unsettles Gray. He knows he'll eventually have to support Isuka when the time comes, but if it were up to him, he'd rather let these kids grow up peacefully. Breaking out of his thoughts, Gray clears his throat, and the chatter dies down. Everyone turns to him. After a moment, he explains his plan. He's thinking about buying a house in the city, and asks if they would like to live there with him. Silence settles over the room until Isuka finally speaks, admitting they're all just really surprised. Fu, sounding hesitant, asks if Gray means everyone. Ariamel, still trying to digest the idea, asks again if he truly means all of them. Gray just nods. Nina immediately bursts out that she wants to live with Dad, her voice full of excitement. Ariamel, more composed but clearly moved, says she'll do her best as well. Gray, caught off guard, wonders how things escalated so quickly. This wasn't exactly how he imagined the conversation going, but after spending the past month with them, he knows he can't simply walk away. At the very least, he's relieved none of them seem upset. Sensing what he's thinking, Errol reassures him that there's no reason they'd be mad. He's fed them, looked after them, and even fixed Nina's doll. He's done far more for them than they ever expected, and they're genuinely grateful. She turns to the others to make sure everyone feels the same. Meanwhile, Gray sits there quietly, still trying to understand what Stella Chan must be thinking. The room buzzes with excitement, even Stella, who's usually reserved, is smiling softly. After a moment, it fully sinks in. Nina looks up at Gray and asks where he's going. He tells her he's heading out to look for a new house for all of them and asks her to stay here with the others. She nods, saying she understands, and Gray thanks everyone before leaving. The whole group is excited, and Isuka keeps assuring him that they'll all be waiting for his return. At the Adventurers Guild, Gray starts imagining his ideal home, cooking dinner for everyone, having a proper bath, giving Isuka and the others their own rooms. A big living room sounds good too. The more he pictures it, the more extravagant his plans become. Maybe a big house. Or even something large enough to host parties. Just as he's lost in thought, Ganzus appears again, immediately asking whether Gray got the old orc's ear. Gray sighs, already annoyed, this guy again. Ganzus insists it's impossible. Gray defeated the orc just 2 days ago and demands to know where he really got the items. Gray wonders if he's seriously this dense. Before Gray can answer, Ganzu starts theorizing on his own, guessing where Gray must have bought the orc ear. That's the last straw. Gray fires back sarcastically, suggesting that if goblins are too scary for him, maybe he should stick to picking herbs instead. Gray knows the rules. Adventurers can still get rewards for killing monsters even without accepting the quest, as long as they bring proof, like an orc ear. But Ganzus keeps insisting the proof is invalid because the ear is still attached to the skull. So Gray casually tosses the entire orc head at him, telling him not to drop it since he carried the whole thing here. Gonza goes pale with shock, and Gray mocks him again, calling him Cherry Boy. The receptionist quickly steps in, telling Gray to knock it off and to just report the mission properly. He places the head on the counter, and Sasha immediately scolds him, reminding him that slamming a severed monster head in the middle of the guild could easily count as harassment. Gray argues it's just evidence, but she's not convinced. She warns that if a new receptionist had been on duty, they might have fainted on the spot. Gray reassures her, quietly thinking that Sasha is one of the few people in the guild who never seems scared of him. That's why, even when the guild is crowded, he always waits for her to handle his requests. Judging by her expression, she's not exactly flattered. After handing him the reward, Sasha raises an eyebrow when Gray asks for help with something. It's unusual for him to ask for guidance, but she tells him to make it quick. Helping adventurers is part of the guild's job, after all. She calls Melinda to take over her station, but the moment Melinda spots the orc head, she screams in horror for Sasha. Gray glances over to see what happened, while Sasha stays calm as ever. She jokes that if people stopped calling her by name all the time, she might finally get a moment to relax. She then shifts back to the topic, Gray suddenly asking about real estate. Sasha leads him to a property she thinks matches everything he asked for. When Gray steps inside, the first thing he notices is how huge the place is. Sasha explains that it used to be where the Valkyries held their gatherings, but once their events grew too large, they moved elsewhere. Now the house has been sitting empty, waiting for a new owner. As Gray takes this in, he remembers the Valkyries, an elite, high-ranking group composed entirely of women. Ariamel nearly reached rank S in Bastok thanks to them, and they're often invited to noble and royal events. Truly, a prestigious group. He chuckles at the thought of young nobles practically tripping over themselves at the sight of the Valkyries. For a moment, he even wonders if the house is being offered to him as part of some Valkyrie-related scheme, because the location, size, and number of rooms are almost too perfect. He can already imagine how excited the kids will be when they see it. Sasha seems surprised at how quickly he's made up his mind, and Gray notes that the price is shockingly low, nearly half of what similar properties would cost in this area. Then Sasha explains that the Valkyries themselves arranged for half of the payment to be covered, but only if he is the one buying it. It's an incredible deal, and Gray knows he'd be a fool to turn it down. Just as he finally starts to relax, his instincts flare. He casually acknowledges the presence of several people, one nearby, two on the roof, and two more hiding in the shadows ahead. His eyes shift to a hooded figure lingering behind him. "If you're planning an ambush, at least learn to hide your bloodlust," he says flatly. The hooded man immediately asks if he's Gray, and everything clicks. These guys are from Spacious Spider, same group, same methods. There's no way they're slipping away this time. The man boldly declares that he's here to take Gray's life, but he doesn't even finish the sentence. Gray moves in an instant, grabbing him by the neck, his voice cold but steady. If they're not part of Rapacious Spider, he'll finish this quickly. But if they are, well, then they're in for a painful time. He doesn't have the patience to play games, so they'd better start talking. Moments later, Gray knocks the man out with ease, sighing in irritation. This whole thing is an inconvenience. He still has dinner to make for the kids, and these interruptions are getting annoying. He turns to another gang member and calmly tells him their time is up. The man, now bound and terrified, demands to know how Gray managed to restrain him so effortlessly. Gray just shrugs, saying it's nothing special, he's already taken care of the two men hiding on the roof. Meanwhile, outside the kids' cabin, the remaining two gang members whisper nervously. One suggests attacking while Gray is gone, but the other shuts him down immediately. If that man comes back, they won't stand a chance. Before they can argue further, a voice slices through the quiet. Gray steps out of the shadows, completely unfazed, replying to their earlier warning as if it were nothing. The two freeze, their confidence evaporating. Without hesitation, Gray ties them up as well. He didn't get much information from the others, but if these two want a painless end, they'd better start talking. Otherwise, they should stop lurking where they don't belong. Later that night, Gray returns to the cabin, where Ariamel greets him with relief. Nina runs over with a bright smile, welcoming him back. Gray pushes aside thoughts of the gang, he'll deal with them once the kids are asleep. Right now, they come first. Nina tugs on his sleeve, looking up at him expectantly, and asks to be held. He hesitates for a second before lifting her onto his lap, and she settles in immediately. The other kids quickly gather around. Isuka offers to help with anything Gray needs, while Stella claims her turn on his lap. Gray laughs, promising he'll hold her next, and then Lutz comes running over, excitedly waiting for his turn. Once they've all settled down, he shares the big news: the house is officially theirs. In 2 days, once everything is prepared, they'll move in. The room erupts in excitement. Later, after everyone falls asleep and Gray is about to leave, Stella wakes up and softly asks if he's going to work, calling him Dad. He apologizes for waking her and tells her he's just stepping out for a while. She looks up at him and asks if he'll come back. Gray smiles and reassures her that of course he'll return, they'll all be living together from now on. Still thinking, Stella calls out again and asks, with a slight tilt of her head, why he chose to become their father. Gray chuckles quietly, saying he doesn't mind telling her and could explain it right now, but Stella shakes her head. She wants to hear it when everyone is together. Gray agrees. It's something the whole family should hear. As he heads out, he can't shake the feeling that Stella saw straight through him, but instead of making him uncomfortable, it leaves him strangely warm and reassured. With a sigh, he starts thinking about how he's supposed to track down the rest of those guys. Muttering to himself, he says that Dad's going to work hard, and looks forward to the two lads showing him the way to their hideout. Soon enough, Gray finds himself standing with two men, one resigned to his fate after leading Gray straight to their hideout, and the other desperately begging for mercy. The second guy insists he's changed, swearing he'll never attack the kids again and just wants to live an honest life. Gray, unimpressed, recognizes him as Cassie and thinks back to how these were the same people who caused all the trouble to begin with. He already warned them once, but they didn't listen. He deals with them quickly, letting them go is too much of a risk, no matter how convincingly they claim they've turned over a new leaf. The safety of the kids and their past victims comes first. Determined to finish everything as fast as he can, Gray moves forward, knowing Nina would be lonely, and Stella would start worrying if he took too long. Meanwhile, one of the remaining thugs, a blonde guy, stares at Gray in confusion, wondering who he even is. Gray doesn't look like a typical law-abiding citizen, more like an adventurer who handles things his own way. Gray moves efficiently, finishing off his enemies with precision. A direct hit to the head is the fastest and most reliable method, no chance of them returning as undead. He avoids using magic, figuring there might be someone around who can sense magical energy. Inside, the remaining thugs panic, whispering about what's happening outside. When they finally run into him, Gray casually tells them he already took care of their friends and is dealing with another one right now. Their fight doesn't last long, he wipes them out quickly. The hideout is the typical setup, a large cave. Judging by its size, he knows it'll take a while to reach the boss's room. Before he can get far, someone shouts about an intruder, and a massive man steps out, bragging about being a former rank B adventurer. Gray barely reacts, he's already decided this guy is weaker than Gansas. Just as the fight starts, an assassin jumps in to attack, making Gray question what kind of training this organization gives its people. One particularly bald and terrified thug tries to run but doesn't make it far. Gray catches him with a well-placed kick, grabs him by the face, and notes how cold he looks. Running was never going to work. After a bit of hesitation, the thug finally gives in and points him toward the boss's office. Gray considers ending things with some style, maybe sending the giant bird in as a parting gift. At last, he stands before the boss. The man looks both surprised and impressed that Gray made it this far, just like the reports warned him. He's curious, what exactly is Gray to those kids? Gray doesn't hesitate. As he draws his sword, he declares that he's their father. The boss bursts out laughing, convinced Gray has completely lost it, but Gray has no time to humor him. He tells the man to get ready to make amends in his next life. Realizing the situation is turning against him, the boss throws out a cryptic remark about the kids, hinting that they aren't normal, but before any explanation comes, the scene shifts. The next morning, Gray is practically buried under Nina and Stella, who are eagerly trying to wake him up for breakfast. Nina, clearly having fun, pokes at him while blurting out something excitedly. Ariamel, watching from nearby, tells them to stop pestering him. Gray is probably exhausted. Half asleep, Gray figures he'll get up soon enough, but for the moment, he just enjoys the warmth. Back at the inn, the innkeeper from earlier is asking about the rapacious spiders. He says they're a large-scale group in the city, and many of their members are fighters who constantly clash with the city guards. They cause nothing but trouble. But now, all of them were wiped out in a single night, every one of them decapitated. He asks Gray if he believes it, since he even heard the hidden members were killed, including the boss. Lena also heard the rumors when she went out. The Baldy adds that no matter how hard the guards try, they'll probably fail. Everyone should be scared of doing something wrong and ending up as the next target. The old innkeeper, blissfully unaware, just goes about his business. Lena, meanwhile, starts reminiscing about Gray, remembering how scary he looked when she was younger. Even now, she still finds his face a little intimidating. Gray, however, is more concerned with preparing for their move into the new home. The plan is set, private rooms for everyone. The kids are thrilled, and Gray cheerfully offers to help wash their hair. At the clothing shop afterward, the attendant looks a bit nervous around Gray but still asks what kind of outfits they need. Gray, completely uninterested in anything related to fashion, leaves all the outfit choices to the shopkeeper. Ara teases him, saying he should probably help pick something out since Gray's sense of style is questionable at best. Meanwhile, Nina excitedly shows off a new dress, twirling around like a little princess. The whole group is in high spirits. When they finally arrive at their new house, it turns out to be even more impressive than they expected, huge, spotless, and full of possibilities. Stella is already sprinting off to explore, dragging Nina along with her. The second floor is lined with cozy individual rooms, and the kids are thrilled to claim their own spaces. Ariel hangs back, letting everyone choose first, reminding himself that they're a family now and this house is theirs to grow into. It'll take time for everyone to adjust, but the excitement in the air is unmistakable. While the kids are busy settling in, Gray's thoughts drift to practical matters, making sure they have enough food, keeping everything organized, and even wondering if he should consider enrolling the kids in school. There's a great academy in the city, one of the best for children, but it's filled with noble families. That part worries him. He doesn't want his kids being bullied or looked down on because of their background. He wonders if it's the right time, or if waiting a little longer would be better. More than anything, he just wants them to grow up happy and have bright futures. As night settles in, Gray finally heads to bed, only to find Stella, Lutz, and Nina piling into his room, clearly not ready to sleep alone yet. They crawl into his bed and snuggle up for the night. Just as Gray's getting comfortable, there's a knock at the door. No surprise, it's Isuka, Fio, and Ariamel, all sheepishly admitting they don't want to sleep alone either. And so, on their very first night in their grand new home, the entire family ends up gathered in one room, tangled together in blankets, laughing and chatting softly until they eventually drift off to sleep. A month slips by, and breakfast at the house has turned into a lively, familiar routine. Gray looks around the table, realizing just how much he's learned about the kids. He's discovered that Asuka is definitely not a morning person, Theo is surprisingly sensitive, Nina absolutely loves food, the complete opposite of Stella, who's the pickiest eater in the house, especially with vegetables. If it's sweets, though, she never hesitates. Those two are definitely the most difficult to manage. Then there's Ariamel, who's always experimenting in the kitchen and eager to learn new recipes. The biggest surprise was finding out that Ariamel can actually read and write, something rare for children in this kingdom, especially those who aren't nobles. After breakfast, Gray gets ready to head out for work. The kids wave him off, but in the backyard he notices Lutz, quiet as always, more focused on the animals around him than on saying goodbye. Gray has come to realize that Lutz is the calmest of the group, always drawn to creatures of every kind. As he heads out, Gray reflects that although he's learned a lot about the kids, there's still so much more to figure out. Near Bastok, he takes on a simple goblin hunting quest. Normally he'd choose the bigger, high-reward missions that take days and require traveling far from the city, but things are different now. With the kids waiting at home, he doesn't want to be gone for too long. Short daily quests like this one are the better choice. Once he's done, he stops by the Adventurers Guild to collect his reward from Sasha. She immediately comments that he's changed. Gray doesn't understand what she means, but she points out that he's been avoiding long missions lately and, more surprisingly, ignoring Gannis's constant attempts to provoke him. Gray hadn't even noticed, but apparently Gannis has been trying every single day. In fact, he's right behind Gray at that very moment, doing everything he can to get a reaction. Gray simply takes his reward and leaves, leaving Gannis more frustrated than ever. On his way home, Gray stops by a small market and picks up some sweets for the kids. As he walks, his thoughts drift to his past life, how empty his home used to feel, how there was never anyone waiting for him. Those lonely days belong to another life now. Before he knows it, he's home. Lutz and Nina are playing in the yard and are the first to spot him. Ariamel appears at the doorway announcing that dinner's ready. Gray hands her the bag of sweets, telling her it's for everyone to share. After the meal, she thanks him but gently warns him not to bring sweets every day or he'll end up spoiling them. Stella has already been skipping dinner just to eat the treats. Gray laughs and admits she's right. Maybe he should ease up. Dinner is as lively as ever, while Isuka and Fio keep stealing glances at each other, clearly wanting to say something. Finally, Asuka speaks, they both want to become adventurers like Gray. Fio even asks if Gray can teach them swordsmanship and magic. Before Gray can answer, Ariamel shoots up from her seat, not thrilled about the idea. But Gray stays calm and says he doesn't mind, though now isn't the best time for the discussion. He reminds them that being an adventurer is dangerous and unpredictable. Even so, in his mind he already knows Asuka has potential, just like in Bright Fantasy. If Asuka really chooses that path, he'll need skills and experience, and Gray is more than willing to guide him so he can avoid unnecessary risks. After dinner, Gray tucks Stella and Lutz into bed and tells them a story until they fall asleep. Once he finally settles in for the night, he hears Stella mumbling in her sleep. He listens closely, something about it feels strangely important. The next morning, breakfast is cheerful as usual, except for the fact that Stella keeps staring at him as if she's trying to read his entire soul. Gray decides to ignore it and enjoy the meal before heading to the guild. Before he leaves, Ariamel hands him a lunchbox, saying she's noticed he's been skipping meals with all the extra work he's been taking on. Gray is touched and thanks her. Then she brings up her worries about Asuka and Fu becoming adventurers. Gray reassures her that it's their choice, but he wants to support their dreams. If she's that worried, he suggests she talk to them directly. She agrees. Finally, he heads out. When Gray arrives at the Adventurers Guild, the place is packed. He spots Sasha rushing around, clearly overwhelmed. Curious, he stops her to ask what's going on. She explains quickly, it's a big day. The Valkyries are finally returning from their expedition to the garden, a dungeon that had never been fully cleared until now. Apparently, a flyer about the Valkyries' return has been posted at the guild entrance for days. Gray glances at it, realizing it's the same one he's been ignoring all this time, then simply shrugs. Sasha, far too busy to deal with him today, tells him to find another receptionist for his mission request. She even adds a warning not to bring any monster heads this time. After all, the last time he did that, poor Melinda cried for hours. Gray moves on to the quest board, scanning through the options. It's been a while since he's been inside a dungeon, and honestly, tackling one right now would be a nightmare. Dungeons aren't dangerous only because of the sheer number of monsters inside but also because of the unpredictable creatures that lurk within. Even outside dungeons, monsters can have strange traits, like magic-resistant goblins or those that are far too smart for their kind. While novice hunters can deal with the regular, dim-witted ones, intelligent goblins are an entirely different problem. After thinking it over, Gray picks a goblin hunting quest, simple, decent pay, and quick to finish. He heads out and clears the area around the city efficiently, finishing faster than he expected. Taking a short break, he opens the lunchbox Ariamel packed for him, and it's incredible. While eating, he can't help but think that Ariamel isn't just an amazing cook, she's also a beautiful girl who'll probably grow into a stunning woman. He jokes to himself that maybe he should start preparing now, so that when she eventually brings home a fiancé, he doesn't accidentally cut the guy's head off. Once he gathers the proof for his quest, Gray returns to the guild. Melinda, already tense the moment she sees him in her line, looks like she's bracing for disaster. To her relief, he's only brought goblin ears this time, no full monster heads. As she processes his request, Gray casually asks if the Valkyries have returned yet. She tells him they have and are currently upstairs in a meeting with Sasha and the guildmaster. Surprised that he's suddenly asking about people at the guild, she teases him, saying it makes sense. After all, the Valkyries are known for being some of the most beautiful adventurers around. Melinda wonders if he plans to wait around for them, but Gray decides against it. He actually wanted to thank them for arranging the house, but since they seem busy, he figures it's better to save it for another day. When Gray gets home, he thanks Ariamel for the lunchbox, and she's thrilled he enjoyed it. She promises to make him one every day from now on. After taking a shower and having dinner with the kids, Gray decides to relax and play some games with them. They're having a great time, laughing, playing cards, enjoying the evening, when someone suddenly starts knocking on the door. The knocking is so persistent it starts to grate on Gray's nerves, ruining the peaceful mood. Annoyed, he gets up to see who it is. To his surprise, two members of the Valkyrie are standing at the door. Amelia, the leader of the Valkyries, stands on the right, while Kasia, her teammate, is on the left. Amelia immediately demands to know why Gray didn't talk to them earlier. She's furious because Melinda, the guild's resident gossip, told her Gray had been at the guild but left without saying hello. Amelia is clearly annoyed, and Gray, sensing danger, mentally curses Melinda for tattling. While Amelia keeps scolding him, Kasia smiles and asks whether Gray is planning to let them in. With the two of them standing at his door, they're already drawing plenty of attention. Before he can respond, Ariamel steps out from behind him and politely asks who these women are, whether they're Gray's friends, and if they'd like some tea. The two Valkyries freeze, completely thrown off by Ariamel's sudden appearance, and Ariamel herself looks confused by their reaction. Gray doesn't make a fuss, he simply tells them to come inside. Once everyone's settled, Isuka asks who the visitors are. Gray explains that they're his old teammates, which instantly impresses Isuka and Fio, who stare at the two women with wide-eyed admiration. After Ariamel serves tea, conversation starts flowing. Meanwhile, Stella and Nina quietly sneak onto Gray's lap, clinging to him for no reason he can figure out. Ariamel pulls him aside and explains that the girls are jealous, they don't want these strangers stealing him. She tries to peel them off, but they refuse to budge, insisting Gray stay with them. Eventually, Amelia asks who the children are. Gray answers casually, "My kids." Amelia freezes for a moment, then irritation flashes across her face, making Nina shrink back a little. While asking who is their mother, Kasia immediately scolds Amelia for scaring them. Then she turns to Ariamel and asks her age. Ariamel says she's 13. Kasia smirks, saying that explains everything, there's no way these children are Gray's biological daughters. After all, 13 years ago Gray was dating Amelia. That comment makes Amelia turn bright red. And that settles it, Gray isn't the wishy-washy type who meanders around until he's 30. He's a family man now, whether he planned to be or not. Kasia also notices Stella's appearance and quietly points out that she's a half-blood. When Stella catches them staring, she panics and hides behind Gray. He soothes her, assuring her that these women won't harm her. Half-blood children are rare and often treated horribly in this world, sold, exploited, or worse, so he wants to make sure she knows she's safe. Gray gathers everyone and starts explaining everything from the beginning, how he met Isuka, how he ended up taking in the kids, all of it. Amelia and Kasia nod along, saying the whole situation sounds exactly like something Gray would stumble into. They chat for a while after that, not just about the children but also about the house. Gray already thanked the Valkyries for helping secure it at a low price, so there isn't much left to bring up. Eventually he notices it's getting late, and the kids are starting to nod off. He excuses himself to put them to bed while Amelia and Cassius say they should head back as well. Gray offers to walk them home, but they wave him off, reminding him they're Ranka adventurers and don't need an escort. He tells them they're welcome to visit anytime. Just as they're about to leave, Ariamel steps forward to see them out too. She politely tells Amelia that even if Gray isn't home, they're always welcome, since any friend of Gray's is welcome here. The word friend hits Amelia like a stab to the chest. She definitely doesn't see herself as just a friend. Still, with her pride wounded, she and Kasia head out, saying they'll visit again. The next morning, Gray heads out after saying goodbye to the kids. On his way, he notices Isuka and Fio practicing basic sword swings in the yard. He reminds them not to push themselves too hard, they could get hurt. They nod and ask if he can start teaching them magic next time. Gray tells them that before they even think about learning magic, they need to know how to read and write, something they unfortunately can't do yet. As he leaves, he finds himself thinking that this life he has now is worth more than any treasure he ever found. He'd take on the world to protect it. Maybe this is what being a father feels like. At the guild, he runs into the Valkyries again. Amelia says she's heading out, and Gray assumes it's another expedition. She corrects him, she's actually going to report to the city lord about their raid on the garden. When he asks what the dungeon was like, she tries to turn the explanation into an excuse for some one-on-one time. Before she can finish her sentence, Kasia grabs her by the arm and drags her off, saying they're in a hurry and Amelia can flirt later. Once they're gone, Gray chats briefly with Melinda, picks up a new quest, and gets to work. As he travels, old memories drift back, his former party, One Blade, Amelia the swordswoman, Kasia the healer, Gray the magic knight, and their leader, a lancer. 2 more members had been part of the team too, though Gray doesn't linger on their names. They were just an average party in the beginning, but through pure effort and countless battles, they rose through the ranks. He doesn't dwell on it for long. He finishes his mission, returns to the guild, and heads to the counter to collect his reward. On his way out, Gray runs into Amelia and Kasia again. They chat for a bit, and Gray asks how their meeting with the city lord went. Amelia sighs, saying they discussed a lot of things, but the biggest news of the day wasn't even about the dungeon. It was about a new hero chosen by the Oracle, someone from another country. Gray is caught off guard, and Amelia doesn't look thrilled either. She explains that the Lord and several nobles wanted the Valkyries to join the heroes party, mainly because they're a high-ranking group close to reaching rank S+. Since they're an all-female team, though, it was obvious the nobles had other motives. They wanted one of the Valkyries to become the hero's bride. Gray asks if she accepted, and Amelia practically shouts that she refused. She felt as if she and her team were being treated like objects, not adventurers. Kasia immediately scolds her for yelling inside the guild, and Amelia, realizing everyone is staring, apologizes before storming off. Later that day, Gray arrives home and is immediately swarmed by the kids. Ariamel tells him that Lutz, Stella and Nina have something important to show him. The kids proudly line up, holding out drawings they made of him. Prepare for cuteness overload. Gray takes one look and collapses dramatically. The kids panic, thinking he hates their drawings, but he quickly pulls them into a hug, telling them he's beyond happy. He's so delighted, in fact, that he vows to buy special magical frames, resistant to fire, water, and impacts, so he can keep their drawings safe forever. In that moment, Gray quietly promises himself that he'll become the best father he can possibly be. Earlier that day, Ariamel had seen Gray saying goodbye to Isuka and Fio. After he left, Stella and Nina asked her what they should do for the day. Smiling, she decided to do something she knew would make Gray happy. But first, she said, they needed to do the laundry. She also told Fio and Isuka to clean the bathhouse. Isuka mentioned they wanted to talk to her about sword practice, but only after they finished cleaning. Everyone went off to do the tasks Ariamel assigned, enjoying themselves as they worked. Suddenly, Isuka slipped on the wet floor and fell hard. The others rushed over to check if he was okay, and Fio immediately grabbed the first aid kit. Ariamel told the 3 younger kids to make sure they held on tight so they wouldn't end up like Isuka. He just laughed it off, and they continued with their chores until everything was done. They headed outside to hang the laundry to dry. Ariamel thanked everyone for helping, and Nina asked her to make sure Gray knew she helped a lot, too. Seeing how tired they were from all the cleaning, Ariamel suggested they eat next. During lunch, she reminded Stella to finish her food. Isuka thanked her and volunteered to wash the dishes, while Fio offered to go shopping. Ariamel told her to pick up some coffee for Gray-san. Outside, Fio ran into Lutz feeding the stray cat again, with Nina beside him. The two were happily playing with the cat when Stella approached Ariamel and said she needed to go potty. Ariamel told her that after that, they would all take a nap. Once they were done, she tucked the kids in. Not long after, Isuka and Fio called for her again. When she asked what they wanted this time, they told her they really wanted to become adventurers like Gray. Ariamel, however, wished they'd choose safer jobs in town, something at the market or the guild, since she knew how dangerous an adventurer's life could be. But they insisted. They wanted to be strong enough to help people, just like Gray. Fio said they would study swordplay and magic so diligently that Ariamel wouldn't need to worry. But first, they wanted her to teach them how to read and write. Ariamel realized they were genuinely serious. These two were thinking about their futures because Gray-san had reached out to them. So she decided to help. Lutz eventually woke up and grabbed Fio's hand, curious about the paper and charcoal she was holding. As he began to draw, Nina woke up as well and asked what he was doing, while Stella remained asleep, dreaming about Gray-san. Seeing the three kids so focused, Ariamel taught them to write something for their father so he'd be happy when he came home. And so, the three wrote, or rather, drew, messages for Gray, and Ariamel couldn't have been prouder. The kids worked hard, determined to learn for the sake of their father, while Ariamel cheered them on. The day begins with Gray waking up to find the kids sleeping around him. He gets up quietly, thinking that he needs to buy picture frames today. As he steps out of his room, he runs into Ariamel, who is about to start preparing breakfast. But Gray tells her that he'll be the one cooking today. While he cooks, Ariamel sets the table. A moment later, Fio bursts into the kitchen, apologizing to Ariamel for being late, her hair and clothes a complete mess. She freezes when she sees Gray cooking and looks a little embarrassed about her appearance. Gray just smiles, saying she arrived at the perfect time, and asks her to wake everyone up. Fio heads off to wake Isuka, her shouting echoes through the whole house. Meanwhile, the three little ones wake up on their own and shuffle sleepily into the kitchen. Gray leaves Ariamel to finish breakfast while he goes to the battlefield towels in hand, to help the kids wash their faces. What should have been simple turns into an ordeal. Nina acts like a frightened kitten every time water gets near her. Stella splashes around more than she washes. And Lutz. Well, someone really needs to help that boy. After the struggle, Gray comes back with the kids completely soaked. As he dries himself off, he tells Ariamel not to prepare a lunchbox for him, he isn't taking a mission today. The kids perk up immediately, asking if he isn't going to work. Gray says he's staying home, and not only that, they're all going out together. Stella timidly asks if she can come too, and Gray tells her of course, it's a family outing. She lights up instantly. Gray knows exactly why she asked, she's worried people will stare because of her appearance. So he adds that if anyone does, he'll. Well, he almost says he'll cut them, but corrects himself and says he'll handle it peacefully. He also recalls how the other day, while talking with House Area, a guard stopped him because he thought Gray was a suspicious man approaching an elf. And today, during their outing, things escalated, he was accused of being a child kidnapper. Gray can't help but think that the prejudice against his face is somehow worse than the prejudice against a half-blood vampire like Stella. The guards interrogate him in the middle of the street, insisting the kids can't be his because they look nothing like him. When they bring up Stella, the child with purple hair and red eyes, they claim they're just doing their job and say they'll take him to the station to sort things out. Ariamel yells at the guards, telling them they're a family. She snaps that if the guards only acknowledge the kids when they're clean and well-dressed, then that's the real problem. The guards are thrown off, but Nina and Lutz immediately cling to Gray's legs, begging them not to hurt their dad. Gray feels awkward, he knows how this must look from their perspective, but it works. The guards back off. Ariamel grabs Gray by the arm and leads the group away as fast as possible. Once they're far enough, she mutters that those guards never helped them back when they wore rags and lived off scraps. After a short moment she snaps out of it, face turning red as she starts apologizing. Gray just thanks her, saying that today, the protector ended up being the one protected. After all that, Gray heads to the inn where he used to live before buying his house. He meets the innkeeper and his daughter, Lena, both of whom are shocked to see Gray suddenly showing up with kids. Carrying the children in his arms, Gray insists there's nothing strange about it. The innkeeper laughs, saying it's just surprising to see Gray doing something so different from what his rough appearance suggests. To celebrate, the innkeeper and Lena prepare a big lunch for everyone. They all enjoy the meal together, and the kids seem to have fun getting to know Lena. Gray casually mentions that his friend's cooking has improved a lot. The innkeeper replies that food always tastes better when shared with family. A few days later, Gray is at home talking to Ariamel. She says she's heading out with Lena to do some shopping, and Gray is glad he introduced them. Ariamel has seemed much happier ever since they became friends. Later that day, while Gray is walking around the city, he runs into Lena's father. They chat for a while, and as they head toward the inn, they spot Ariamel and Lena being pestered by two guys asking them out. The girls refuse, but the men keep pushing. That's when the two killing machines, in other words, two very protective dads, appear behind the girls with cheerful smiles. They call the guys over for a friendly chat. In the end, the boys only get a light scolding, but from the way they tremble, it's obvious they think Gray and Lena's father are dangerous criminals. After the two would-be suitors run off in terror, Ariamel, who had been waiting nearby, apologizes for dragging Gray into that situation. Gray notes that she holds herself back too much, and that she should let herself have fun sometimes instead of staying so reserved. He tells her he's glad she's made a new friend, obviously referring to Lena. Gray casually says Lena is just a little girl and he doesn't mind spoiling her a bit. In fact, he says he'd like to spoil her just as much as he spoils Nina and the others. Right then, Nina and the kids show up. Nina immediately asks if being spoiled is a bad thing. Gray smiles and tells her spoiling her makes him happy, and that he'll spoil her plenty, just like he'll spoil Stella and Lutz, who come running over and draw everyone's attention. Gray scoops both of them up and tells them they'll always get his attention. He adds that the same goes for Isuka and Fio, who are standing nearby, quiet as usual because of how shy they are. Then he turns to Ariamel and tells her he'll spoil her too, because she's always holding herself back and keeping her feelings bottled up. After that, he pulls everyone into a big hug, enough to make even Steve Mao shed a manly tear. The next day, Gray is training Isuka in swordsmanship. He reminds him not to close his eyes when attacking, among several other issues. Gray decides that he'll teach Isuka magic as well, but only after the boy learns to read and write properly. No mistakes, no shortcuts. It's the foundation of magic, after all. He also says it isn't worth teaching someone who doesn't put effort into their studies. While Gray trains Isuka, Ariamel quietly watches from the window. Gray remembers that he only started giving lessons to Isuka and Fio because Ariamel, who was against it at first, eventually asked him to teach them. He sees Ariamel as a child with an unusually strong sense of responsibility and protection, especially for someone her age. Once Isuka is completely exhausted, Gray tells him to rest, then calls Fio over for her turn. Now the story shifts to a different place, the Holy Church of Storia. A man dressed as a priest or a bishop talks to a boy who seems to be a knight. The man tells him that he's about to go, and preparations for departure should be complete now. He adds that he'll send someone to get him presently, so he should just wait for a moment. As the boy leaves, his expression changes as he says that the boy is the same as ever, and even if it was the oracle who proclaimed it, having to take care of a gloomy child like that will surely bring him down. It turns out that the boy is the hero who was proclaimed by the oracle, and the knight said that his strength is the real deal even though he has never held a sword before. In a mere 3 months' time, he's sure he'll surpass any average knight. The bishop then says that their next target is the saintess. He recalls that she's located somewhere in the neighboring country in Bastoke. But he warns the knight not to say that to the others and to just say that the saintess is from this country, because they'll never know who might be listening, so he should be careful with his words. The knight agrees with what he says. The bishop thinks the saintess is from a wealthy merchant class. He did not expect that the hero and the saintess of this current era would both be orphans, and he thinks it would be easy for them to bring them here without getting into trouble in the future. It turns out the saintess he was talking about was Ariamel, and now they're about to abduct her from Bastoke. The knight knows it's an abduction mission for them, and knowing that the saintess is still a child, it doesn't seem like she'll make a good snack. The bishop enters the carriage as they head to the land of Bastoke. Despite Ariamel's objections, he still taught both Isuka and Fio swordsmanship. Meanwhile, in the neighboring holy kingdom of Storia, Ariamel had been recognized as a saintess. The protagonist was reading a book about a hero and a saint when Izuzuka overheard him muttering to himself and asked whether Gray had said anything. Gray simply answered, no, and then asked Isuka what he thought about the hero and the saint. Isuka replied that he didn't have any particular thoughts on them. Gray asked Fio the same question. Fio said that they were supposed to be the ones who would save the future of the world, but the whole thing sounded too grand, more like a fairy tale. Gray figured that the main character and heroine, much like Fio and Izuzuka, probably came from some special lineage. But judging by the children's reactions, they didn't seem interested at all. There was also the possibility that they simply knew nothing about it. He decided he would look into it later. Theo then whispered to Izuzuka that Gray looked deep in thought, wondering if something had happened. Izuzuka replied that he had no idea. The day before, while they were on their way to turn in a quest, Amelia had asked Gray to stop by the Valkyrie's place for a moment. Gray couldn't understand what she was up to, but she told him to just follow her quietly. When they arrived at the Valkyrie's house, someone greeted him. Kasha apologized for the suddenness and asked if he could listen to what they had to say. Gray asked if it was something they couldn't talk about at the guild. Kasha explained that there were too many people there. She invited him to sit and offered tea, but Gray said he could talk without it and asked her to explain everything. Kulsaria then asked if he had heard about the hero from the guild leader. Gray replied, something about an oracle. Kulsaria continued, saying that the hero had come from the holy kingdom of Storia. For some reason, a path had been carved through the forest for the procession, and the forest fairies had reported it to her. Gray remarked that he had heard forest-dwelling elves could understand fairy speech, then asked how the fairies knew the hero was coming. Kulsaria said the hero was a special existence to them. They recognized him the moment he entered the forest. Gray asked if the hero was traveling alone. Kulsaria said he wasn't, though she didn't know how many people accompanied him. Gray then asked why they were telling him all this. Kasha reminded him that they had turned down the hero's invitation to join his party. Since they didn't know what was happening, they wanted to be prepared. She added that they couldn't trust the city lord. Amelia said they believed Gray could help them if things went wrong, and Kasha noted that Amelia had been the one who pushed for him specifically. Gray replied that he wasn't refusing to help, he already thought of them as comrades. What troubled him was that the procession was avoiding the main roads. That alone felt suspicious. There was a chance they were planning something involving Isuka and the other children. Gray decided he needed to drop all upcoming missions and stay home to watch over them. He asked Amelia, Kasha, and Kulsaria to take care of the children if anything happened to him. The girls promised. Gray wondered aloud whether the hero would die if his head were cut off. Back in the present, at the protagonist's home, Gray noted that Ariamel was running late. Theo suggested the kids might be having trouble sleeping. Gray said he would go check on them. When he entered the room, he found all four of them fast asleep. He gently pulled a blanket over them before stepping out. Isuka followed him upstairs and asked where his sister was. Gray told him she had fallen asleep with the others and shouldn't be woken. They headed back downstairs and returned to what they were doing. Gray glanced at Theo and Izuzuka and thought about how hard they had been working lately. If the hero's goal really was to approach the children or the girls, then the only thing he could do was protect them no matter what. A knock sounded at the door. Theo asked if someone had arrived. Gray told him he'd take care of it so the children could focus on their studies. Theo agreed. As Gray walked toward the door, he instinctively reached for his weapon. He asked who was there, and a voice answered that they had news. When he opened the door, he found Amelia standing outside. He asked if she had come alone. Amelia raised a brow and asked if that was a problem. He said it wasn't and invited her in. Amelia explained that she would come inside, but Kasha had told her to return quickly. She reported that the hero had already left the forest, and if the group headed straight for the city, they would arrive in less than half a day. She took something from her pouch and handed it to Gray, a pair of magical communication stones. Although they couldn't send messages, focusing on one would cause the other to glow. She gave him one to use if anything happened and promised she would come immediately. Gray realized he had never seen these items back when they were in the same party. They were normally used for dungeon exploration, simple tools that helped locate an ally's general position. They weren't very expensive, so adventurers often carried them as good luck charms. Gray thanked her and told her to use her own if she ever needed help. Amelia said she was counting on him as well, then took her leave. After she left, Gray reflected on how long he had lived on his own. He hadn't even known these items existed. He figured he should buy some for Isuka and the others. The children asked who had come, and Gray told them it had been Amelia. They chatted briefly before she left. Theo suddenly asked if Amelia had been on the same team as him before, and if she was the girl who had visited recently. Gray confirmed it, saying she was the blonde swordswoman. Theo's eyes widened, and she said Amelia was a very beautiful woman. Gray poured tea for everyone and handed out cups. Then Theo asked if Amelia was his girlfriend. Gray almost choked on his tea. Isuka scolded her, saying she shouldn't ask things like that. Gray said it was fine and asked why she thought so. Theo explained that Amelia had looked at him in a certain way when she last visited. Gray wiped his face and admitted that they had dated when they were in the same party, but that it had ended long ago. She was his ex-girlfriend. Fio asked why they broke up. Before she could continue, Isuka tugged on her and said that wasn't something you should ask. Gray said it wasn't for any special reason, they just separated, like many couples do. Fio tried to pry further, but Gray cut her off, saying he wasn't going to say anything more. He thought to himself that he could understand someone admiring Amelia, but he couldn't imagine anyone being interested in someone like him. Just then, the door burst open and a disheveled Ariamel rushed in, shouting that she would start preparing lunch. Isuka told her they had already eaten. Ariamel calmed down and said she had just woken up from a long dream. She sat down and blushed when she realized her hair was a mess, then hurried off to wash her face. Gray remarked that she had beautiful hair, and Fio scolded him, saying that would only embarrass her. Gray wondered if it wasn't better for the girl to hear such compliments. As twilight settled in, Gray went to the kitchen and offered to help Ariel with dinner. She said she could manage alone today. Gray figured it might be adolescence creeping in. Outside, the children were playing in the yard, and he waved at them. When he turned around, he saw the innkeeper standing there with a large pot in his hands. Gray asked why he had come. Had Lena finally thrown him out? The innkeeper grumbled at him to shut up and thrust the pot of soup forward. He said he'd never actually seen their house before, but it was surprisingly nice. The innkeeper leaned in and told Gray that a few people had been asking about Ariamel at the inn in the guild tavern. They were dressed like mercenaries or adventurers, but their behavior was surprisingly polite. He warned Gray to be careful. Gray thanked him for the heads up, but the innkeeper waved it off, saying there was no need for gratitude. Lena and Ariamel were close friends, practically family. Helping each other was only natural. Gray thought he was just being shy. Arya walked up and asked about the pot he was holding. Nina explained that Lena's father had stopped by and brought them soup. Gray added that he'd already shared some with them. Arya lit up with delight. Gray suggested they bring something and return next time, and Arya happily agreed. She told everyone to wash their hands and go get some soup. Just then, someone knocked at the door again. Gray stopped Ariamel and said he would answer it himself. He quietly told her not to show her face at the door. Ariamel froze for a moment. Gray said he might be out for a while and asked her to put the younger ones to bed if he came home late. Ariamel understood immediately. From behind the closed door, Gray asked who was calling at such a late hour. The visitors apologized and introduced themselves as members of a mercenary order known as the Night Mist Hawk. They said they'd come on behalf of an aristocrat and were searching for a girl named Ariamel. Did anyone in this house know her? It made sense that the aristocrats would hire mercenaries. There was no war, after all. High-ranking adventurers were bound by laws and guild regulations, whereas mercenaries weren't. Adventurers carried guild-issued IDs recognized across different countries, and their contracts had to comply with each nation's rules. Breaking those laws could result in fines or even the loss of their license. High-ranking adventurers were expected to maintain proper conduct, especially around nobility and members of the royal family. Mercenaries, however, had none of those restrictions. They worked purely on trust, and their loyalty belonged to whoever paid them. They probably assumed Gray was an adventurer. As long as he didn't claim to be anything else, they wouldn't question him. The only thing he knew for sure was that these men couldn't be trusted. Gray said he would open the door. Two young men in armor stood on the doorstep. One thanked him, while the other repeated that they wanted information about a girl named Ariamel. Gray immediately asked for the name of their employer. One of them replied that they had promised not to reveal the client's identity to strangers. Gray told them that in that case, he had nothing to say to them, and they should leave. He knew very well that hiding a client's name while searching for people was forbidden. Did these idiots think that just mentioning an aristocrat would make everyone spill their secrets? Even if the client had been a member of the imperial family, Gray wouldn't have told them a thing. The mercenaries grew irritated. One asked if Gray truly refused to tell them anything. Gray answered, exactly. He added that he could tell they were mercenaries, and mercenaries weren't used to being turned down. The second man asked what he meant by that, but Gray only replied that if they had more questions, they should come another day. His children were already asleep, and it was time for their guests to leave. He also added that he had no intention of staining the home his children lived in with someone else's blood. The mercenaries exchanged whispers, and one tried to look past Gray's shoulder into the house. Gray shot him a hard glare. They eventually said that was enough for tonight and that they'd return tomorrow. Gray suspected that their companions were likely waiting at the back door. But the house had originally been built for an all-female adventurer team, so both doors were reinforced, and the windows were protected with magic. Breaking in would be impossible. They were probably waiting for a moment of calm to attack. If their target was Ariel, they might keep her alive and silence everyone else, but Gray preferred to strike on his own terms. For now, he let them walk away. Meanwhile, Amelia appeared from around a corner, dragging one of the Night Mist Hawk mercenaries with her. From the mercenaries' viewpoint, one of them commented that the rumor had been confirmed, the man really was hiding a girl in his home. The second mercenary agreed. The guy they were talking about looked like a brute. At first glance, he could pass for a seasoned adventurer, but he was nothing more than a low-level thug. One mercenary noted that Gray had said the children were asleep, but they clearly weren't his real children. The second mercenary guessed they were slaves or orphans, since the girl herself was an orphan. He wondered aloud why Gray would be keeping the girl. The first mercenary believed it had something to do with a noble cause. The second muttered that whatever it was, it sounded disgusting, something better left unsaid. He said that if they reported everything to the bishop, their task for the night would be done. Once Soma joined them, they could return again. Gray quietly followed them and overheard the name of their employer. He repeated it aloud, wondering if that was the man's name. The mercenary spun around and demanded to know who said that. Gray was standing behind them, his face twisted with a murderous expression. He told them that if they were planning to leave, they'd better not forget, they were leaving trash behind. One of the mercenaries shouted at Gray, demanding to know what he had done to their comrade. Gray was dragging the unconscious man behind him. He told the mercenary to lower his voice, he could hear him just fine. From the way the man had gone down, Gray added, it was obvious he hadn't been much of a fighter. He tossed the unconscious mercenary toward his companions and said he was still alive. He only handed him back so they could answer his questions. Gray asked why they were looking for Ariel, what they planned to do with her, and where the bishop was. One of the mercenaries muttered that since he had learned about the bishop, they couldn't let him leave alive. Gray raised his sword and demanded again, loudly, why they weren't answering him. He didn't wait for a response. His blade struck, and one mercenary's arm flew off. The second mercenary froze, realizing how fast Gray was. Before he could finish the thought, Gray's next swing severed his head. Halsaria hurried around the corner and asked Gray if he was finished. Gray asked if she'd seen everything from start to end. She nodded. Yes, indeed, he had dealt with them without mercy. Gray answered that mercenaries didn't deserve mercy. Anyone who threatened the peace of his children was an enemy. If someone wanted to take something from another person, they had to be ready to lose something in return. He would take it, no matter the cost. Halsaria was surprised that Gray cared so deeply for the children. Gray told her to be quiet. Loving and protecting his children was normal for any parent. She said he needed to find a wife quickly and asked, half-jokingly, what about Amelia? Gray replied he had no idea what Amelia would do to him if she heard that. Halsaria laughed and said Amelia would probably blush and get flustered. She then asked if Gray understood the hero's position. She pointed off into the distance and said that once they left the city, the hero's group would be right about there. She was certain, everything matched what the spirits had told her. They could make a bit of noise outside without worrying. She added there were 5 people in total, including the hero, 1 in ornate robes, 1 in bright white plate armor, and 2 dressed like mercenaries. Gray thanked her for the information. Halsaria wasn't just a skilled archer, she was an exceptional scout. She did things entirely different from what he did, but she excelled at them. She asked if she could join him, saying she could cover for him. If she returned home now, Amelia, who was watching over the house, would be furious. Gray nodded. He understood and trusted her completely. He had left the defense of the house to Amelia. She had wanted to follow him, but he'd entrusted the children to her instead. She was as strong as he was, possibly even stronger. She had also had a minor misunderstanding with Ariel earlier that evening, but he hoped they would get past it. At the outskirts of Bastoke, the bishop complained that the mercenaries had been walking forever. He asked if they disliked their assignments. One of the guards replied that they hadn't received any new updates since noon. The current information was that Saintess Ariel had been taken in by a local adventurer and was living with him. The bishop scoffed that adventurers were worthless people who lived only for the moment. If someone offered them enough money, they'd sell out anyone. He was certain the adventurer would hand over the girl without hesitation. The mercenary warned that if the adventurer learned the girl was a saintess, he might try to take advantage of the situation and demand too much. The bishop said there were many ways to handle that. All they needed to do was confirm whether the Saintess was in the adventurer's house. That was all. He had already sent 3 mercenaries, but they were still nowhere to be seen. He needed to retrieve the Saintess quickly and return to Storia. His future would be bright then. His dream of becoming a vicar would finally be within reach. If negotiations failed, it would be easier to sneak into the adventurer's house at night and kidnap the girl. The adventurer and any witnesses would have to be silenced. Nearby, the hero sat on a stump, wondering aloud if Ariamel would be separated from her loved ones as well. The knight beside him said there was nothing worse than tedious waiting, which was exactly why he had been sent here. His name was Lundy, a 7th-rank holy knight. He walked over to the bishop and asked why they didn't just finish things quickly, since he was the strongest among them. He complained that if boredom went on much longer, he might die before he even had a chance to bet a girl. The bishop thought that while Lundy was talented enough not to lose to even an A-rank adventurer, he was also an uncontrollable womanizer and would almost certainly do something disgraceful to the Saintess if they let him approach her. So the bishop insisted he remain close as his bodyguard. In his absence, anything could happen. Well, Lundy admits he's right. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, saying the atmosphere here was awfully unpleasant. They all drew their swords and stepped in front of the bishop. The bishop demanded to know who was there and what he wanted. Gray stepped out and asked if they were the stalkers sniffing around for his daughter. Everyone in the clearing was stunned. The bishop apologized hurriedly and said he must have mistaken him for someone else. Gray told him to drop the act. Ariamel was his daughter. Then he asked the man in robes if he was the bishop. The bishop confirmed it and then asked if Gray was the adventurer. He added, almost nervously, what had happened to the 3 mercenaries he had sent. Gray smiled and asked whether he really wanted to know. Alarmed, the bishop quickly said he would refrain from asking. The remaining mercenaries tensed up. One of them shouted that the bishop should demand to know what happened to their comrades. The bishop ordered him to be silent. They had only themselves to blame, following simple instructions had been beyond them. The bishop then asked what Gray's goal was in coming here. Gray replied that he'd come to get even with them. Get even? The bishop repeated. How much do you want? Gray blinked in disbelief. What? The bishop continued, money. How much are you asking for in exchange for the girl? Gray asked if they were talking about Saintess Ariamel, his daughter. That's when it clicked, the Saintess had been chosen through divination. The bishop laughed and said it wouldn't matter if the Saintess was still a virgin or not. Gray froze. What? The bishop laughed even louder and said there would be no problem even if Gray had already slept with her. Something inside Gray snapped. Rage surged through him. He lifted his sword and shouted, die. Lundy intercepted the strike. He told Gray that killing the bishop now would create a massive crisis, they'd become the enemies instead of the bishop. The bishop was terrified. A blade was drawn against him, and he was outraged. He shouted that all adventurers were the same. Then he screamed for Alas, the hero, to protect him and kill the adventurer. Alas grabbed his sword but hesitated. Lundy shouted at him not to lose focus and parried Gray's next attack. Gray noticed the hero was still just a child. He didn't look like a warrior. Gray didn't know how strong the boy was, but the knight in white armor was clearly the skilled one. Halsaria hadn't returned yet, which meant the hero and the holy knight would end up fighting him alone. He needed time to understand what was wrong with the hero. Then, without warning, Lundy punched Alas in the face and yelled at him to get out of the way. His eyes were wild. He announced he would take Gray on alone and ordered Alas not to make a single unnecessary move. The bishop yelled at Lundy, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. Lundy snapped back, telling him to shut up. He said he wouldn't allow a simple adventurer to defeat a holy knight and a brave warrior. When he killed the adventurer, he planned to have his fun with the Saintess before returning. Gray's rage ignited the moment he heard those words. He shouted that he'd send the knight to whatever god he worshipped. With all his strength, he swung his sword, saying the knight could die with a smile for all he cared. Lundy braced himself, feet digging into the ground. Up in a tree, Halsaria saw flashes of light cutting through the distance. That had to be it. She dashed from branch to branch, quick as a squirrel. Lundy desperately parried Gray's attacks, swearing non-stop. He was no longer convinced this was just some ordinary adventurer. The bishop kept screaming at him to hurry up and kill the man already. He couldn't understand why it was taking so long. Lundy shouted back, threatening to kill the bishop first if he didn't quiet down. He struck again, but Gray blocked everything. Lundy couldn't read his movements at all. Gray yelled that he was a pervert who needed to be castrated and aimed a vicious blow at his groin, which Lundy narrowly blocked. The knight barked at him not to joke around and charged. Gray noticed he'd cast body enhancement magic, but even so, Gray's counter sent him flying. Lundy cursed and rushed in again. He hadn't expected that he'd need to use his personal trump card on someone like this. Furious, Lundy shouted that he'd finish the adventurer for sure and that he would enjoy the saintess right in front of his corpse. Then he slipped into an esoteric technique and vanished into a cloud of smoke. At that exact moment, an arrow shot from the darkness and buried itself right in his groin. Lundy froze in shock. Before he could react, Gray's signature strike came crashing down. His sword cleaved straight through the knight's neck. The head rolled toward the bishop. The young hero fainted on the spot, and the remaining mercenaries dropped their swords. The bishop panicked. He didn't want to die here, he needed to escape somehow. Gray hadn't expected the knight to attack so directly, and the surprise had made him hesitate a fraction of a second. Halsaria emerged from the trees and said she was finished. Gray praised her work. He walked up to the bishop and apologized for making him wait. Then he asked if the bishop had enough time to pray. The bishop trembled, terrified of the expression on Gray's face. Gray told him he would be sent to meet the god he loved so much. He urged him to smile, it was supposed to be a joyous occasion. The bishop tried to bargain. If Gray killed him, the church would retaliate, he warned. He offered money for his life. Gray refused. Then the bishop offered women, then the rank of holy knight, saying Gray's strength could secure 4th rank, maybe even 2nd. Gray said he'd let him go if the bishop paid compensation. Delighted, the bishop latched onto that one word. Money, yes, money was good, money was important. He asked how much Gray wanted. Gray said that 4 people had already paid him. One mercenary blinked in confusion. Really? He asked. The other mercenary immediately threw down his sword, swearing he would never again touch the adventurer or his family. He begged for mercy. Gray asked what frightened him so much. Gray explained that according to their doctrine, good deeds guaranteed eternal peace after death, while dark thoughts led to punishment even in the afterlife. Gray nodded. Then, as compensation, he took both their lives. With a single stroke, he cut off both of their heads. He said they should count it as an easy death. Gray believed that showing mercy to enemies only invited disaster. They would eventually crawl back for revenge. Protecting them was pointless. The bishop shrieked, begging desperately. He didn't want to die. Gray told him that his pleas were useless, his god had already grown tired of waiting. Halsaria stepped in and stopped Gray. She said there was something she needed to return to the bishop first. She held out several Teutonic crosses on chains. The bishop stared in disbelief. Halsaria explained they belonged to his escort, and that she'd already released their horses, there was no carriage left. She asked if he had any teleportation stones. She tossed the crosses at him. The moment they hit him, Gray swung and chopped off his arm. The stones fell from inside his robe. Teleportation stones were expensive, single-use magical tools that only worked within a 2-kilometer range, far too costly for what they offered. Gray realized the bishop had been hiding them to escape. Calling him annoying, he said it was time to finish things. Before the bishop could say another word, his head rolled across the clearing. Gray walked over to the hero and asked if he was awake. He told him not to pretend. Allah slowly pushed himself up. Gray said he had some questions, and the boy needed to answer truthfully. He asked if his name was Alice. The hero nodded. Gray guessed he was around 13, the same age as Ariamel, still a child. Alice explained that he'd been abandoned at the door of an orphanage, so he didn't know his real age. Gray asked, "The orphanage in Storia?" Alice replied, "No. In Kodarl." Halsaria added that Kodarl was the kingdom neighboring Storia, while Bastok lay in the opposite direction. A third of Kodarl's territory was forest. Gray asked why he served Storia if he was born in Kodarl. Alice explained that one day, a group arrived at the orphanage calling themselves emissaries from the holy nation of Storia. One of the men had asked him specifically if he was Alice. It turned out that the bishop who had been killed earlier was the very same man who once visited Alice at the orphanage. He had told Alice that, by their god's will, he had been chosen as a hero and was to accompany them to the sacred land of Storia. When Alice asked if his friends could come as well, the bishop refused, saying only he was permitted to enter the holy capital. He promised that the others at the orphanage would be taken care of, but his tone made it clear that Alice didn't have a choice, whether he wanted to go or not, they would force him, and he couldn't be sure the other children would remain safe if he resisted. A girl named Mia, who sat beside him, began crying. Unsure if these people would keep their promises, Alice agreed to go. Good. Well done, Lord Alice, the bishop had said. He made Alice promise that if anyone ever asked where the hero came from, he must always answer Storia and that he understood what might happen to his friends if he failed to obey. Then the rogue men took him away from the orphanage. Now, Alice explained that he had come to Bastoke to retrieve the saintess chosen by God's will, believing the same thing was about to happen to Ariamel. Gray finally understood the situation and asked what sort of combat training Alice had. Alice answered that Lundy had taught him, meaning he was more capable than an average knight, but he still couldn't compare to Lundy, who was a member of the Holy Knights. Gray glanced at Lundy's severed head and wondered if this was truly the standard of a Holy Knight. He had imagined them to be far stronger. The Holy Knights of Storia were famous even in Bastoke, ranked strictly by strength, and only those in the Sacred Armory reached 5th place or higher. He wasn't sure what to do with the boy. Part of him wanted to spare the child and send him home. Halsaria pleaded to save that discussion for later, insisting that she just wanted to go home and sleep. Gray agreed, it was late, and offered Alice a room at an inn. Alice accepted. Though Gray could have taken him to his own house, he knew he would have to speak with his children first. Gray checked the bishop's belongings and found a pouch of money. Halsaria called him a heretic for taking it. Gray asked why. After all, the dead had no need for gold, and it counted as compensation for emotional distress. He added that looters did the same thing, and besides, the bishop himself had offered him money earlier. Money was money, and they would need it to send this child home. Halsaria sighed and said she understood. Gray then picked up the teleportation stones from the ground. Halsaria asked if he planned to sell them, but he shook his head. He said he would move the bodies to an appropriate location so the goblins could take care of them later. After relocating the corpses, he used the movement stones. Judging by how the bishop had been sneaking around Bastoke in search of Ariamel, it seemed he hadn't spoken with anyone in authority there. If he had, Storia would have sent a stronger force. If that was true, Storia wouldn't be able to make much noise about his disappearance. They wouldn't dare dispatch another group without permission, and they certainly wouldn't want the missing guards and the missing hero traced back to them. Gray told Halsaria to return to Amelia and the others and said he would handle getting Alice settled at the inn. Halsaria waved and headed off. At the inn, Gray told the innkeeper he needed a room for the boy and paid for 2 nights in advance. The innkeeper agreed, saying it was rare to have guests arrive so late. Gray brought Alice upstairs and told him not to worry about any strange people he might see. Alice replied that he understood. Gray told him to rest and promised to return for him the next day. Alice thanked him for paying for the room and said he would definitely repay the money. Gray waved it off, saying it wasn't even his own money. Alice nodded. After making sure the boy was settled, Gray left the inn and headed home. Halsaria greeted him with a quiet welcome back, adding that she had already told the others everything. Amelia was stunned that Gray had actually saved the hero, while Kasia, on the other hand, said she wasn't surprised at all. Gray had always been like that. Gray thought Amelia would be angry, but instead she simply asked what they should do next and what he planned to do with the hero. Gray said he would first talk to the children, and if they agreed, he would bring the boy into their home. Aless had shared things with his friends back in his own world, so he would probably want to meet them, and Gray wanted to grant that wish. But before anything, he needed more information. There were still things that concerned him. Amelia closed her eyes and said she understood. She told him that if he ever needed help, he just had to say the word, they would do everything they could. Gray apologized and thanked them, and Amelia replied that there was no need for formalities. He was their comrade. Gray suggested they go inside before they ended up standing out there forever. Amelia suddenly became shy and said she wasn't sure. Kasia gave her a look and told her it was time to give up running away, time to overcome that wall. Gray wondered what exactly that wall was supposed to be. Amelia flushed red and insisted she would just go home for today. Halsaria asked if she was really running away again, but Kasia answered that there was a military court tomorrow. Halsaria stopped in shock. She didn't want to go, she was sure she'd ruin everything. Kasia tried to reassure her, then apologized to Gray and said they should head home too. The girls hurried after Amelia. When Gray stepped inside the house, he found Ariamel sleeping on the couch. He quietly announced that he was home and asked why she wasn't in bed yet. But when he got closer, he realized she had fallen asleep sitting upright. He carefully lifted her and carried her to her room. Looking at her face, he felt as though she might be trapped in a nightmare. Even if it was only a dream, he wanted to be there to save her. In her dream, Ariamel stood alone in complete darkness, cold, lost, unsure how she had gotten there. She just wanted to go home. The little ones must be hungry. She wondered if there was even food at home now. As the eldest, she had to stay strong. But she didn't know how to get back. Suddenly, she saw the burned-down hut where she had once lived. Her parents were gone, yet she had found the children and begun a new life. They had no money and barely any food, but they were happy as long as they had each other. That was all they had left. Then she relived the nightmare of the bandits breaking in. One of them seized Nina, and Lutz tried desperately to pull her back. Ariamel saw herself trying to save him, only for the bandit to throw Lutz to the ground. Another man grabbed her by the clothes, threatening her to stay silent. From that night on, she was to become their slave, chains around her neck, the sting of a whip, the constant abuse. They treated her like a dog, feeding her scraps. A voice suddenly declared that she was a saintess chosen by the oracle's prophecy, and pointed to a boy who was also chosen. The man told them to love and cherish each other. The same boy who had abused her and kept her chained apologized. A scream echoed in her mind, enough. She screamed at him to give her babies back. Tears streamed down her face. She wished death upon everyone who had hurt her and cursed them all. Then she died, plunging a knife into her own stomach. She saw the faces of the children, Isuka, Fio, Stella, Nina, and Lutz, and begged their forgiveness for failing to protect them. She was alone again in that cold emptiness. Until suddenly, she felt warmth. She wondered if her parents were warming her. She opened her eyes and saw Gray. He apologized for waking her and gently asked about the nightmare. Still half lost in the dream, she said she didn't remember. Gray reminded her that he told her not to wait up and that sleeping on the couch could make her sick. Ariamel apologized and said she had wanted to tell him something when he returned. Gray asked what it was. She smiled softly and whispered, "Welcome home." Gray was reminded of returning home in his past life, coming back to an empty house where no one waited for him, only painful memories. He didn't want to remember them, but he didn't want to forget them either. At times, small, insignificant memories surfaced, stupid, warm, familiar things. Out of habit, he would still announce that he was home or heading out, even when no one was around to hear it. He had simply missed having a family. Holding Ariamel in his arms, Gray smiled and said, "I'm home." Her smile grew even brighter. In that moment, he made up his mind, he would be family to these children for as long as he lived. Gray carried Ariamel up to her room, but she asked if they could all sleep in his room instead. She was certain the others were already there. When Gray opened the door, he froze in surprise. The children were fast asleep in his bed. He gently laid Ariamel down. She thanked him and told him to lie in the empty space beside her. Gray agreed, patting her head before settling in. 7 people in one bed. It was going to be tight. He thought about buying a bigger one so he could see all the children's sleeping faces. Or maybe he could just become their bed somehow. The idea amused him. Just then, a small hand grabbed him. Nina had woken up and whispered that she needed to use the bathroom. Gray forced himself to stay calm. Nina nodded and asked him to carry her. When he came back with her, Stella was sitting up, saying she needed to pee too. Gray set Nina down and picked Stella up instead, quick like a dad, quiet like a dad. He assumed Nina had already gone back to bed. But when he returned with Stella, Lutz was standing next to the bed. Gray told him to wait, only to realize the boy had already wet his pants, a small puddle forming underneath. Lutz burst into tears. Gray knelt down, telling him it was all right and that he'd clean it up. He tried to soothe him, insisting it was completely normal and nothing to worry about. Logic never helped with crying kids, talking too much only made things worse. Later, Gray slipped back into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He couldn't lie there knowing Lutz's pajamas would stain if he didn't wash them tonight. So he quietly got up, cleaned the pants, and realized by the time he was done that dawn had already arrived. He hung the pajamas to dry, thinking longingly of sleep. But the moment he drifted off, the attack began. Nina jumped on him, demanding breakfast. Stella tugged on his ear, saying Ariamel was calling him. Half asleep, he thought he might as well turn into breakfast for them. Stella tugged harder, reminding him it was time to eat. Isuka wished him good morning and said breakfast would be ready soon, so the children should wash up. Gray nodded and went to get himself ready. While washing his face, he tried to remember how Isuka and Aless had interacted in the game. Were they friends? Rivals? Enemies? Whatever the case, he hoped they could get along in reality. At breakfast, Gray decided to tell the children about someone he wanted them to keep an eye on, a boy named Aless. He hoped they'd get along with him. "Is everyone okay with that?" he asked. The children leaned close to each other, exchanging looks. Nina was the first to speak. "Is there a new kid?" Ariamel said she agreed. Isuka nodded as well. Fio added that she was fine with it too. Gray deliberately didn't mention Alessa's status as the church's chosen hero. What mattered more was that none of the children objected to welcoming him into the family. Nina and Stella offered to bring more plates. Isuka and Fio supervised as the girls carried the dishes with confidence. Ariamel thanked all three for helping her. The children stood there beaming. Nina asked Gray if they'd done a good job. Stella proudly added that they all helped. Gray hugged them and said they were wonderful. That was his privilege, after all. Afterward, he left the house and headed to the bar. The room was crowded, and several men glanced his way as he entered. Gray went up to the counter. The bartender asked what he wanted. Gray tossed a few coins over and told him to pour whatever he recommended. The bartender caught the coins midair and served him a drink. Under the glass was a small slip of paper. Gray closed his hand around it, downed the drink, and went to the meeting place. The designated spot was deep in the backwoods. A double bench sat beneath the trees, one side occupied by a man feeding pigeons, the other empty. Gray took the open seat. "You're a rare customer," the man said. "Haven't seen you in ages." Gray greeted him politely and said he needed something checked. The informant seemed surprised Gray had come in person, which meant the matter was serious. "What do you need?" Gray explained that he had adopted a child from an orphanage in Kodarl and wanted to know whether the orphanage still existed. If not, he wanted to know what had happened to the children who had lived there. The informant warned him that Kodarl's territory was vast and the job wouldn't be cheap. Gray said that was fine. "How much?" 200 gold up front, the man replied. "Another 200 when I return. 400 total." Gray accepted. After receiving the advance, the informant said the search would take a few days. He assured Gray he wouldn't run off with the money. Gray told him he was free to try, otherwise, he would hunt him down, dig him out from underground, and kill him. The informant laughed nervously and said he'd better get started. At that exact moment, all the pigeons in the square took flight, leaving Gray alone on the bench as feathers drifted down. Gray then went to pick up Aless. The innkeeper said the boy had grown worried, thinking Gray had abandoned him again. Gray asked if the innkeeper had been watching him. The man replied that Aless had stayed in his room the whole time, which surprised Gray. In the hallway, he ran into Lena. She greeted him and asked what happened. Gray explained he had come to fetch Aless, who was staying there. Lena asked if that meant the boy was his friend and whether he lived with them. Gray said not yet, then asked for her opinion of him. Lena said she didn't think Aless was a bad person, just a bit gloomy. He behaved more like an adult than a child. Gray suspected she had something else she wasn't saying. Lena then excused herself to continue cleaning, apologizing for stopping him. Gray said it was fine. He knocked on Aless's door. A voice from inside called, "Come in." Gray opened the door and apologized for being gone so long. Aless tried to speak, and Gray noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked. There were mushrooms growing on Aless's head, an odd, gloomy sight. Gray asked, "Is this what makes you look so down?" He froze for a moment, realizing this must have been what Lena was referring to earlier. Gray told him not to think too much about it, and suggested they go buy what they needed instead. Aless agreed. As they walked, Aless took in the beauty of the city. He said that in Storia, he was only ever allowed to walk from his room to the training grounds and back. He hadn't gone shopping in ages. Gray found that genuinely surprising. Aless's gaze drifted to a fruit stand, and Gray caught it. He asked if Aless wanted apples. Aless picked one up and said that when he lived in the orphanage, fruits and desserts were only given out on holidays. It was different once he became the hero, when he had endless access to whatever fruit he wanted. But somehow, this small apple felt more luxurious than the feast served in the kingdom. "It sounds strange, doesn't it?" he said. "What does?" Gray asked. "Food tastes better when you eat it with family. Did you know that?" He remembered his old friends from the orphanage and the warmth he used to feel. He let out a small laugh. "It's true." Gray thought the same thing. Ever since the children came into his life, mealtime had become warmer and livelier. He would do anything to protect this lifestyle. He could finally say, without doubt, that he was happy. When they reached the house, Ariamel greeted them. "Welcome back," she said. I'm home, Gray replied. She turned to the young man beside him. You must be Aless, right? Aless, a bit unsure, nodded and said it was nice to meet her. Ariamel invited him inside. Gray asked her to gather the others in the living room so he could introduce Aless to everyone. All right, she said, promising to prepare more tea so they could relax for the moment. Aless quietly asked if that girl was really Ariamel. In Storia, she was known as a saintess. Gray answered simply, she's my precious family. Aless's expression dimmed. Gray assured him nothing was wrong and told him not to worry. Aless murmured his agreement. Gray wondered if the boy still felt guilty about handing Ariamel over to the bishop back then. He truly wanted to help him. Inside, Theo and Isuka walked up and introduced themselves. Aless stayed silent. Gray wondered if this awkwardness was just the natural fate of these game characters meeting each other. Then 3 small children entered the room and stared at Aless. Lutz clung to Aless's leg, making him smile despite himself. Stella studied him as if trying to decipher something. Aless glanced nervously at Gray, silently begging for rescue. Gray pretended not to see it. He needed time to observe Aless a bit longer. Nina suddenly asked if she was Aless's older sister. Gray tried to understand her logic. Aless was Aless, obvious enough. And older sister was also straightforward. Yet somehow, he still didn't understand what she meant. Nina pointed at Aless. He's my younger brother. Aless blinked in surprise. Theo asked Nina why she was the older sister. Nina explained that she was the first one to come to this house, and Aless only arrived today. Then everything clicked for Gray. She ranked siblings based on arrival order. I get it now, Gray said. Aless asked, confused. Gray brought him further inside while all the children revealed new sides of themselves. Ariamel offered Aless tea. Theo and Ariamel were warm and welcoming, while Isuka grew quiet around strangers. Stella and Lutz rarely attached themselves to anyone, so they quickly lost interest in him. Nina debated whether to give Aless a sweet but ended up eating it herself. Gray then asked Aless to choose a room. Aless thanked him and picked one. Gray noticed it was the room farthest from everyone else. He asked why. Aless said it wasn't because of the other children, he simply felt more relaxed on the edge of things. The answer caught Gray off guard. After Aless settled in, Gray asked if he'd caught his breath yet. Step outside with me for a minute, he said. Aless nodded. Gray suspected that if he found Aless's friends from the orphanage, the boy would leave him. He couldn't force Aless to stay. All he could do was help him for now. He asked if Aless knew any magic. Aless said he had a teacher in Storia. Gray nodded. I see. He gave Aless a stick. I'll train you. Get ready. Yes, Aless replied. Gray wanted to gauge his strength. He told him not to hold back and to strike with full force. If the Demon King appeared sooner than expected, Aless needed to be prepared. Aless attacked, but Gray blocked every strike easily. The boy's movements were fast and precise, almost unbelievable for someone who had been training only 3 months, but they were linear, and the blows were light. Aless's frightened face told Gray he still hesitated to hurt another person. Gray felt sorry for him, but he would have to overcome that fear eventually. Gray knocked the stick out of his hands. That's enough, he said. He told Aless that tomorrow he would register him as an adventurer, and they would take on an assignment suited for beginners. He also reminded him to rest after dinner. Aless agreed. Unknown to them, Isuka stood by the window watching the test with a sad expression. Later, Aless asked Gray if he was really a B-rank adventurer. Gray corrected him, he was B+. So what about it? Aless hesitated. Are all adventurers as strong as you? Gray remembered the monsters he'd fought and answered in a roundabout way. Aless explained that at the training center, Lundy forced him into mock battles to test his strength. Aless never stood a chance. Lundy mocked him, hit him, stomped on him, spat on him, each time blaming Aless's weakness. Aless spent all that time wondering why he had been torn away from the people he loved. Why he had to endure such things. Gray wondered again whether he had done the right thing by killing that holy knight. Finally, Aless asked, will I become strong too? If I become an adventurer? If he grew stronger, would he be able to reunite with Mia and the others? Gray knew that was a difficult question. He had no doubt Aless would become stronger, strong enough to surpass even him one day. But whether he could be with his friends again? That depended on what the informant would discover. No matter what Gray said, Aless wouldn't find peace until he knew the truth. Still, Gray answered firmly, yes. Focus on your goal. Not just to be brave, but for your own sake. Aless nodded, stood up, and headed toward the house. Before going in, he turned back and said that he would wash off the dirt before dinner, and he thanked Gray for the training. When Gray entered the house, he found Isuka waiting in the hallway. Gray asked what he was doing there. Isuka asked whether he and Fio would be training tomorrow. Gray explained that he planned to spend the entire day doing guild missions with Aless, then train him again before dinner. Isuka's expression fell. I see. Gray understood immediately, and it hurt to look at that disappointed face. So he added, but after dinner, I'll train with you and Fio too. Which meant he'd have to take a bath before bed tomorrow, but so be it. Isuka brightened and nodded. Good. We don't have much time left to train Aless properly. Even so, Gray couldn't ignore the other kids. He suggested they go have dinner. Isuka proudly announced that he helped cook tonight's meal. Gray said he couldn't wait to try it and ruffled the boy's hair, making him laugh. Then he asked if Isuka had washed his hands. Isuka startled, then quickly apologized. Everyone gathered around the big table for dinner. Ariel pointed out that Isuka's head was covered with sand. Isuka gasped, there's still some left? Gray admitted he had touched his head with dirty hands. Ariel scolded him. Nina immediately asked to be patted on the head too. Fio reminded her, not at the table. Gray said he had washed his hands anyway, but Ariel still refused. Not allowed. Ariel then asked about Lutz wetting himself the night before. Gray wondered aloud if the bed had any stains. She then asked whether she could sleep in Gray's room with the kids for a while. The little ones kept waking up at night to go to the bathroom, and she was worried. Gray said the extra help wouldn't hurt. He jokingly suggested using body enhancement magic to carry all of them to the bathroom at once. Ariel immediately rejected the idea, it would be too much work for him. She announced she'd be joining Gray's room temporarily. Aless overheard and looked surprised. The next morning, Ariel asked Gray to bring her some tomatoes. He handed her one. Here, she laughed and thanked him. Aless stood quietly in the kitchen doorway. Gray gave him a puzzled look and greeted him. Ariel also said good morning. Aless murmured a shy good morning. Both Gray and Ariel watched him closely, he was acting oddly. Gray told him breakfast wasn't ready yet, so he could go wash his face first. Aless abruptly said he already had, and then bolted out of the kitchen. Ariel asked what that was about. Gray said he had no idea. A sleepy Fio arrived and greeted them. She said Aless looked really nervous, she saw him running earlier and wondered what had happened. Gray explained that Aless simply woke up before breakfast was ready. Nothing more. Fio asked Ariel about sleeping in Gray's room. Ariel confirmed it. Nina and the little ones get up a lot at night, so I'm staying there for a while. Fio nodded and said Aless probably misunderstood something. Then she went upstairs to wake Isuka. Gray asked what in the world was going on this morning. Ariel just shrugged. Who knows? He returned to helping her prepare breakfast. Nina was trying to wake Stella, and Lutz stood in the doorway, sleepy as usual. Gray heard Fio and Isuka moving around upstairs. Soon the younger kids came stumbling down the stairs. The house grew lively again as Gray washed the three small ones. Mornings were chaotic, but eating together as a family was always fun. Isuka annoyed Fio as usual, Ariel wiped Nina's mouth, and Stella quietly moved food she didn't like to Lutz's plate. Gray used to eat breakfast alone. Now, his mornings were never quiet, and he couldn't imagine it any other way. Only Aless sat silently at the table, looking downcast. Gray suggested that after breakfast, Aless help him wash the dishes. He explained that he would also give him some household chores, just like everyone else. Aless repeated the words softly, family? Nina shouted that she would help too. Gray praised her, saying Nina, Stella, and Lutz were great at carrying plates, so he could count on them. Stella echoed, count on us. Fio and Isuka smiled. Ariel said she would leave the dishes to the kids while she prepared lunchbox for two. Aless agreed quietly. Gray then announced that he and Aless were leaving soon. The children wished them good luck. On the way out, Gray wondered whether he should register Aless under his real name. It was possible Storia was already searching for him. Aless asked if that could happen. Gray said the guild did have people who handled matters like that, and once a name was registered, it couldn't be changed. If Aless became an adventurer, that would be the name he lived with for the rest of his life. He should think carefully. Aless nodded, admitting Gray was right. Gray bought him a short sword at the weapons shop. His old sword would have been perfect for Aless, but Gray planned to give that to Isuka someday. When they reached the guild, Aless asked if this was really the Adventurers Guild. Gray said yes, and urged him to hurry so they could register and pick up some quests. He placed Aless in the registration line and said he would check the quest board in the meantime. Come find me when you're done. Gray examined the posted requests. As long as Aless stayed under his guidance, he wanted him to gain proper achievements. Aless could probably handle a goblin or an orc, but as an E rank, he would need a party, except E rankers rarely got invited, since no one trusted them. Gray knew he couldn't accompany him forever. He was a dangerous man in this city. Wolves would be the perfect group for Aless to take on, but due to instinct, wolves avoided people with unusual abilities, like him. Gray began wondering whether he was actually becoming a burden to the boy. Suddenly Aless called out to him. He had finished registering. Gray noticed that Aless hadn't changed his name. Aless explained softly, "It's the only gift my parents, whom I never even met, ever gave me." He told Aless that, for now, he would be taking goblin-slaying missions. Gray asked if he had any experience fighting goblins. Aless replied that he had fought goblins and orcs a few times before. Gray said that was good, then simple quests should be manageable. He suggested starting with rescue missions afterward. A familiar voice suddenly called out from behind, asking who the brat was. It was Gansas. He wondered if Gray, the lone wolf, had finally decided to form his own party and start training rookies. Gray asked Gansas if he was blind. Wasn't it obvious he was training a newcomer? He added that, as usual, Gansas had his eyes and ears in all the wrong places. Gray also told him to be more aware of the low skill level of his so-called B-rank party. He had heard that Gansas had been given the head of an elder orc the other day and still chickened out. Gray said he found it unbelievable. At this rate, adventurers would go extinct if everyone was that frightened. Gansas angrily asked what Gray had just said. One of his party members shouted at him to stop fooling around. They were in a hurry, and they had been preparing for the mission for days. Gansas grumbled that he understood and went to catch up with his group. Aless asked who that was. Gray explained that the weirdo always wanted attention and picked on everyone. He also noted that although Gansas had taken a chief orc quest, he never came to report his first kill at the reception desk. Sasha asked Gray whether this newcomer was a friend of his. Gray replied that he would be training him for now. Sasha joked that with Gray around, any mission would be easy for the new guy. She handed them the application form and told them to be careful around the outskirts of Bastoke. Gray and Aless continued through the forest until Gray suddenly told him to stop. Aless asked why, and they peeked quietly through a patch of bushes. 3 goblins stood in the clearing. Gray said these monsters were headed toward the city. He instructed Aless to kill them once they came close, but he had to do it quickly, before they could make noise or resist. Once the goblins wandered close, Aless leapt from the bushes and attacked. They didn't even have time to squeal before they fell to the ground, sliced apart. Aless asked how he did. Gray said it went well. His movements today were better than yesterday's training, sharper and more focused. He added that Aless needed to point his sword more decisively at the enemy. Aless noticed Gray looked surprised, so he explained that during training with people, he was afraid of hurting someone, but with monsters, he didn't feel that hesitation. Gray realized that for Aless, fighting humans and fighting monsters were completely different. He would have to gain far more experience before he could ever kill a person. Gray wondered if any bandits were nearby. He told Aless they should keep moving. These goblins were scouts. They checked the area to decide whether to attack towns and villages. Aless argued that goblins would never dare attack a city as large as Bastoke, so couldn't they leave them alone? Gray answered that if goblins ever targeted Bastoke, their first victims would be children. His expression hardened, and he said they would kill every last goblin. He exhaled and added that Aless would be doing most of the work. Aless was startled. Gray pointed ahead. The rest of the goblins were there. In a wide clearing, around 50 goblins trained for an attack. They were led by 1 general, 2 warriors, and 4 orcs. Gray said he would help. He would take the large goblins and the orcs on the right side. The rest would be up to Aless. Aless asked again, shocked, "You want me to kill that many goblins?" Gray said he would strengthen him with magic this time. First, he would lure away and kill the most dangerous ones, while Aless handled the rest. Many goblins try to flee when they realize they're losing, he warned, so they couldn't let even one escape. Aless nodded. He assumed they would gradually run and their numbers would thin out. Gray cut him off sharply. That wasn't what he meant. Not a single goblin was allowed to escape. Then he gave the command, "Move." Aless tried to object, but Gray had already stepped forward. The goblins heard noise from the bushes and turned. Gray pushed through and remarked, "Now I understand why it reeks in here." He invited the orcs to join the fun. The goblins cheered, thrilled by the promise of a fight, and charged like a swarm of insects. In the bushes on the other side, Aless waited for the order to attack. One of the orcs stepped forward, roaring menacingly. Gray didn't flinch. He blocked the orc's strike with one hand and muttered that it took too long to attack. With a single motion, he severed its head. Another orc swung a massive hammer, but Gray held him back with one hand and sliced away half his torso with the other. The smaller goblins trembled. The goblin general realized many of his soldiers had already fallen, but for some reason, he felt no hatred toward the man slaughtering them, perhaps because Gray looked like he was simply enjoying himself. Gray mocked the general for trying to look like a seasoned warrior and engaged him one-on-one. The goblins had killed countless people, they didn't care who stood before them. They killed only to grow their numbers. The remaining leaders charged. The lesser goblins shouted encouragement, but it made no difference. A burst of blood and the remains of their leader flew back toward the crowd. Aless joined the fight from the opposite side. He cut down goblins quickly and boldly, surprised by his own speed. The magic enhancement was more powerful than he expected. Several goblins attempted to flee, just as Gray had warned. Aless regretted that he couldn't see Gray fight. He reminded himself that he couldn't allow any goblin to escape, even if forcing an opponent to retreat felt dishonorable to him. He wondered what it really meant to fight by the rules. The goblins froze, unsure what to do next. Gray finished the general and the orc warriors. Even after losing part of his arm, the general had looked oddly cheerful, a strange creature indeed. 4 ordinary orcs remained, and Gray considered leaving them for Aless to handle. Aless moved across the battlefield with incredible speed, cutting down goblins. Gray noted that he was adapting to combat fast, despite his lack of experience. What would he become after a few days? A goblin tried to attack Gray from behind, but was instantly killed. After the fight settled, Gray said it was time to cut off their ears and collect them. Aless agreed. When Aless walked over, he saw Gray working on the elder orc's remains. He asked what Gray was doing. Gray replied that he was cutting off the trophy of an elder orc. It could be sold for a good price. He told Aless to remember what he said. Aless muttered, "All right," and turned away, disgusted by the sight. Gray held the orc general's head in his hands and said he might as well keep it as a souvenir. Aless couldn't understand who would ever want a souvenir like that. He quietly continued cutting off the goblin's ears as instructed. When Gray asked if he had collected all of them, Aless handed over 2 bags and said he had just finished. Gray nodded in approval and told him to take the bags to the guild, then paused. If he sent Aless alone carrying such spoils, the guild might assume Gray had abandoned a newcomer to a pack of goblins. People would think horribly of him, even though it wasn't true. Gray changed his mind and told Aless there was no need to bring anything, he would report it to the guild himself. Aless answered obediently. Gray gave him a couple of coins and told him to drink some milk and kill time, since talking to Sasha might take a while. At the guild, Gray explained everything to Sasha. As expected, she was furious that he had left a beginner to fend off a whole group of goblins. What made her angrier was that Gray wanted to give Aless all the credit. She said it would look suspicious for a brand new adventurer to rise through the ranks so quickly on his first day. Gray replied that he was just supporting the kid, he didn't care if anyone doubted him. Aless really had defeated most of the goblins by himself. When Sasha checked the loot, she found a pair of goblin warrior ears mixed in, which genuinely surprised her. She told Gray she would assign the quest to him, but Aless would still rank up. Gray said that wouldn't help anything. Sasha reluctantly agreed, admitting this time he was making the right call. Gray said there was no need for further discussion and went to look for Aless. He found him surrounded by a group of girls. One of them cooed over how adorable he was and asked if he wanted to join them. Another reminded the others he was a newbie and said they were D-rank adventurers, they could bring him along on missions. Aless blushed, stayed silent, and sipped his milk. Gray overheard and walked toward him, seeing the look of pure desperation on the boy's face. Aless had fought goblins fearlessly, yet now he looked terrified of a few girls. Gray apologized for being late and asked if they were heading home. Aless quickly agreed. One girl muttered, "It's Gray," and another added, "What's that boy doing with him?" But they quickly turned away and left. Gray asked Aless if they weren't supposed to help him just now. Aless seemed unsure what to say. As they approached the house, they found Amelia standing on the porch, trembling nervously. She was mumbling to herself, clearly overwhelmed. She had come by suddenly, and with gifts, yet now couldn't think of what to say. Gray asked, "What is she doing?" Startled, Amelia spun around and stammered, What a pleasant coincidence." Gray agreed, for politeness' sake, but thought it was a strange thing to say while standing at someone else's door. Amelia asked if this meant today was a lucky day. The warring maidens, Valkyrie, were known throughout the capital and beyond. Being close to S rank, they even drew the attention of royalty. They had conquered the flower garden, too. What would their fans think if they saw their leader in such a state? Pulling herself together, Amelia asked if this was the boy Gray had mentioned earlier. Gray said his name was Aless, a victim of Storia. Amelia's expression softened. Really? She introduced herself properly. Aless recognized her right away as a member of Valkyrie. He introduced himself shyly and said that he had just begun working as an adventurer that very day. Amelia told him he could ask her anything if he ever got confused, though with Gray beside him, she doubted he would need her help much. Aless bowed deeply and thanked her. Gray suggested they continue the conversation inside. But when he reached for the door, Ariamel suddenly shouted for him to stop. He looked at her closely. She seemed frightened, though she quickly greeted him and insisted she hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Gray told her there was no need to worry. If Amelia was visiting, she didn't have to be afraid of saying anything. He asked her to prepare tea for their guest. Ariamel nodded and took the snack box from his hands, leaving him awkwardly holding his own box. Inside, Amelia greeted everyone. The children were playing on the carpet in the living room. Gray asked if she had come alone without Kasha. Amelia explained that Kasha was in the middle of a consultation with another team member and had her own plans today. Amelia untied her bundle and revealed the treats she had brought, offering them to the children. Gray thanked her and said they would all have the sweets once Ariamel brought the tea. He asked Amelia if she also wanted tea. "Can I?" she asked. "Of course," Gray said. "You brought the treats, after all." Ariamel returned with the tea. Gray told her that Amelia had brought sweets, so they would need plates and forks. Ariamel said she would bring everything right away. She added that she had wanted to make sweets herself, so the dishes were already prepared. She had even brewed extra tea. Amelia was impressed by how capable Ariamel was. She stood abruptly and announced she wanted to help with something. Ariamel insisted she sit down and relax. She was a guest. Gray noticed Amelia had been acting strangely ever since she returned from the expedition. Amelia kept insisting she help. Nina stared at her, surprised, then she and Stella each grabbed one of Amelia's hands and gently guided her to the sofa. They then ran over and sat beside Gray. Amelia said for a moment she thought the little girls had recognized her, but Gray told her they were just greeting her warmly. The girls finished setting the table and Ariamel cheerfully announced, "Bon appetit, everyone." Amelia was amazed at how quick and nimble the children were. The kids happily grabbed their treats, sat on the sofa, and began eating sweets with their tea. The little ones were all smiles. Gray noticed a few crumbs on Nina's cheek and gently wiped them away. He asked if she liked the sweets, and she nodded, licking her fork. Gray then caught Amelia watching him with a strange expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No, everything's fine," Amelia replied. "It's just. You looked exactly like a real father just now." "Really?" She quickly added that she didn't mean it in a strange way, that it wasn't surprising to anyone, nor did she think he wasn't fit to be a father. In fact, she said, he was already a better father than before. "Is that so?" Gray murmured. The kids then started clamoring for more sweets. Gray asked Ariamel if he could give them his portion. She smiled and said, "Just for today." Ariamel gave her piece to Stella, reminding her to eat only half. Amelia handed hers to Nina, while Gray passed his to Lutz. Isuka offered his to Fio but asked if she was sure. Fio immediately stabbed the sweet with her fork and gobbled it down. "What is she doing?" Isuka cried. Aless calmly offered his own to him, but Isuka waved it off, insisting he didn't need to worry. Then Nina reached her hands out to Amelia. Amelia blinked. "What is it?" Nina thanked her sister, making Amelia laugh as they shook hands. She replied, "You're welcome." Gray couldn't help thinking that a tiny child had just flustered one of Bastoke's strongest adventurers. Nina really was something. With Nina guiding her, Amelia helped clean up the dishes. She quickly became friends with the children as they played together. She was terrible at card games, though, and kept drawing the Joker. Gray realized it was getting late. The kids needed a bath. He asked Amelia if she wanted to spend the night. She blushed. "Spend the night?" she repeated, and nervously said she'd better head home. But the moment the children looked up at her with sad, pleading eyes, her resolve crumbled. Stella said she didn't want her to leave. Nina wanted to keep playing. Amelia gave in and agreed to stay. She played with them for a while longer until Ariamel announced that the bath was ready. Amelia insisted she would go last. Gray lifted Lutz onto his shoulders, tucked Stella under his arm, and told her the water would cool down if she waited too long. Amelia simply smiled and said she would manage. After she went into the bath, Nina fell asleep on the couch. Gray told her that if she was sleepy, she should head to bed rather than force herself to stay awake. She mumbled in her sleep about her new sister Amelia. Gray sighed and said nothing more could be done. Ariamel agreed. Just as they were leaving the room, Amelia stepped out. Aless bolted away, wishing everyone good night. Amelia glanced around in confusion, thanking them for the bath and Ariamel for the pajamas. She asked Gray not to look at her so much because she felt shy. He apologized and turned away. Ariamel told her she looked very pretty. Pretty? Amelia repeated. She had been complimented before, but she usually brushed them off. Gray had never seen her react much, except once, when someone praised her red dress and she blushed bright enough to match the fabric. What's wrong? Amelia asked him suddenly. You're not usually like this. Nothing, Gray said quickly, suggesting they put the kids to bed. Ariamel said she would take Stella, Gray would take Lutz and Nina. Amelia asked if she could put Nina to bed, and Ariamel agreed. Theo began pushing Isuka out of the room. Gray thought Amelia really had let her guard down around them. Ariamel explained that the kids usually slept with Gray and asked if Amelia and Nina could sleep in her room tonight. Gray said he didn't mind if Amelia didn't. Amelia said she was fine with it. Ariamel called for her to follow. But before leaving, Amelia turned back to Gray. I just wanted to say good night, she said softly. Good night, he replied. The next morning, Gray woke up, adjusted the kids' blankets, and headed downstairs. To his surprise, both Ariamel and Amelia were already in the kitchen. He greeted them, and Amelia teased him that he seemed to enjoy sleeping in. Gray said it was warm and cozy when the kids slept beside him. He asked if he could help, and Ariamel asked him to chop vegetables. Amelia said she could chop too. Gray blinked, he only knew her to be skilled with a sword. She decided to set the plates instead. Gray mentioned to Ariamel that Amelia once sliced a cutting board in half with a single stroke. Ariamel was stunned. Gray noticed 3 neatly packed lunches on the table. Ariamel explained that she had made snacks for everyone, including Amelia. Gray apologized to her for the one time he refused her snacks before, and she said it was fine, she always packed extras just in case. Gray thanked her for always thinking of them. Soon the children gathered for breakfast. After eating, the adventurers prepared to leave. Ariamel handed out the snacks, and Amelia was shocked to receive one too. She asked when Ariamel even had time to prepare it. The little ones looked at Amelia with sad eyes again. Nina told her that her big sister should come again. Stella waved goodbye. Amelia promised she would return. She thanked Ariamel, who happily said she enjoyed having her there and looked forward to hearing more of her stories. Gray felt like Amelia was acting embarrassed about something. Aless looked off, too. Gray figured those two needed to talk eventually. As the 3 adventurers walked through the city, Amelia said having a family must feel wonderful. Gray agreed. She confessed she wanted to see her own parents and sisters again, though she wasn't sure they wanted her back. Gray said he doubted that. Her father was a noble from the same region, and she had been expected to marry like her older sister, but she didn't want that life and ran away. Kasia, her childhood friend, followed her, and the two became inseparable. Amelia stopped and said it was time for her and Gray to go their separate ways. She apologized for her sudden visit. Gray said it was no trouble at all, they always welcomed guests, especially children. Amelia waved and said they would meet again at the guild. Gray turned to Aless, saying they should head out, too. Aless apologized, then suddenly asked what Gray's relationship with Amelia actually was. Gray wondered why everyone was so curious about it. Aless hesitated, then asked if Gray might be a polygamist. 8 years earlier, a group of villagers had been traveling toward Bastoke, unaware that bandits were watching them from above. The bandits attacked their carriage, intending to capture them all as slaves. Everyone was terrified by the grim turn of events during what should have been a peaceful journey. A young girl had been tied up with rope, while one of her brothers fled, forced to watch his sister being taken. By sheer luck, the boy managed to escape and ran into the forest to get away from the bandits. At the Bastoke Adventurers Guild, the new receptionist Sasha was welcoming visitors who came to take requests. Suddenly, she noticed a boy stumbling inside, breathless and shaken. She rushed over and asked what was wrong. The boy, still trying to catch his breath, looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. He said he was told that the people here could help him. Then he began to cry, explaining that his older sister had been captured by brigands, his parents too. He was only able to escape because they told him to run. Sasha tried to comfort him and gently asked if he could explain more. The boy told her they had been riding a wagon to attend the festival in Bastoke when the brigands attacked and took everyone. His family and the others from his village needed help immediately. He broke down crying again, and Sasha could only imagine the horror he had witnessed. It was the first day of Bastoke's annual festival, a 3-day celebration filled with stalls, parades, and visitors from nearby villages. But with the influx of travelers came an increase in criminals, brigands, swindlers, kidnappers, and every kind of opportunist. The festival was profitable for them, too. Security inside Bastoke was strengthened for the occasion, but outside the city, people were on their own. Sasha realized the boy was lucky to reach the guild alive. He told her he wanted to make a request and handed over all the coins he had. Sasha and the other receptionists felt terrible for him. They debated whether to accept such a request, but if no one acted soon, it could be too late for the boy's family and the other captives. At the same time, it was dangerous, asking adventurers to fight an entire band of brigands for nothing more than a handful of copper coins. Sasha finally decided she would add some of her own money to the reward. Just then, Gray arrived and stared at Sasha as if she'd lost her mind. She and the others quickly explained the situation to him. Gray immediately told them to accept the quest, there was no minimum reward needed anyway. Just fill out the request, he said. Then he turned to the boy and hesitated for a moment, wondering how to reassure him. He asked if the boy had come all the way here because he wanted someone to save his family. The boy nodded. Gray asked what business they had in Bastoke, and the boy explained they were planning to sell goods at the festival plaza. That was all Gray needed to know. Sasha asked if he was really going to take the quest. Gray didn't hesitate, of course he was. He even laughed, saying that the size of this brigand group sounded manageable, and they were probably sitting on a nice pile of gold. Sasha asked if he intended to go alone, since everyone knew he didn't have a party. Gray replied that she didn't need to point out the obvious. For missions like this, he preferred going solo anyway, and she knew his party had disbanded recently. Sasha understood, Gray genuinely wanted to help the boy. He accepted the quest without hesitation. On his way out, he promised the kid he would complete it without fail and told him to wait patiently at the guild. The boy could only hope Gray would save his family. Gray headed straight toward the brigands' hideout where the captives were tied up. The bandits were celebrating their haul, praising the festival for bringing them such easy profit. They joked about the only companion who got himself injured after clumsily falling while chasing the runaway boy. One of the brigands wondered aloud if it was really okay to let the kid escape. Another laughed and said it didn't matter, he was just a child. No child could possibly hire adventurers to get revenge. The injured bandit, still furious, marched toward the captives, deciding to take out his anger on the boy's family. He didn't care if they were supposed to be merchandise. Seeing the daughter was only a kid, he planned to torment the mother instead. But as he approached, he heard the lookout telling someone to circle around. Then something dropped to the ground behind him. Annoyed, he told the lookout to keep quiet. When the man didn't answer, he checked on him, only to find the lookout's severed head lying on the dirt. Frozen in horror, he didn't notice Gray behind him until a blade touched his neck. Gray asked if they were the ones who had attacked a wagon earlier. The man couldn't answer from fear. Gray said it wasn't really a question anyway. Then, without hesitation, he ended the man's life, saying he'd erase him no matter what excuse he offered. 6 days had passed since Celeste became an adventurer. Each day he completed different quests, fighting goblins, tree monsters, orcs, and various criminals. Sasha was often stunned that the difficulty of his requests didn't match his rank. Running into a powerful monster by accident wasn't unheard of, but Celeste seemed to attract them constantly. Despite his skill, his first battle against humans had been far tougher than any fight with monsters. He also attended lectures to learn how to identify medicinal herbs and sell materials properly, knowledge essential for adventurers. With that, he finally began earning steady income. But he wasn't the only one improving. Isuka had stopped closing his eyes when swinging a sword, and started watching his opponent properly. Fio had finally manifested her magic, though she still didn't understand how she was doing it. Gray knew her progress was beyond anything he expected. For someone who had only just begun training, she had grown unbelievably fast. Gray was proud of them, though part of him felt uneasy about how soon they might become adventurers themselves. Now, Aless was reporting to Sasha about an orc he encountered by chance. Sasha processed the request, and Gray said everything was fine, suggesting they go home. Aless agreed. Suddenly, Ganzus appeared and questioned Gray, asking if Aless would become an adult just by exterminating goblins. He insisted they were already killing orcs at this point. Gray asked if Ganzus had completed the first stage of orc extermination and congratulated him mockingly. Gray tossed something to Ganzus. When Ganzus opened the bag and saw the head of an orc general, he yelped and threw it aside. Gray decided he should throw him a manictor's head next time. Gray and Aless left the guild, and Gray noticed 2 white doves perched on the tiles. Gray told Aless that he had just remembered something important he needed to take care of on his way home, so Aless would have to return by himself. Aless looked surprised but agreed. Gray wondered, half-jokingly, if this was the end of their time living together. Somewhere else in the city, Gray met with his informant. The man greeted him, saying Gray had taken long enough to arrive and that time was running short. Gray asked what he'd found out. The informant explained that, first of all, the orphanage in Kodarl no longer existed, its grounds had been turned into trading stalls run by the Philauer Company. Gray repeated the name, surprised. He remembered Philauer as a well-known merchant family in the country. The merchants and his wife had supposedly died in an accident years ago. Gray didn't know the details, only that a relative had taken over afterward, and the whole incident had been suspicious from the start. Still, wealthy merchants opening shops in other countries wasn't unusual. But Gray was more concerned about the children from that orphanage. The informant continued, all the children were alive, but they had been enslaved in Storia. He asked Gray if he had braced himself for the worst. Gray was stunned. Slavery was officially banned in Storia. The informant replied that although it was banned publicly, some nobles and members of the clergy secretly kept slaves. Gray asked where these people were keeping enslaved children. The informant smirked and said Gray sounded ready to deal with them immediately, driven by his bloodlust. He explained that the owner of the slave operation was a man named Zanus, just an ordinary merchant on the surface, but someone who had quietly begun supplying slaves to nobles in exchange for illegal goods. Gray repeated the name through clenched teeth, Zanus. The informant added that Zanus had already fled the country. Gray asked why someone like him would run. The informant said a coup had taken place in Storia. A coup d'état? Gray was shocked. Storia had holy knights, fighters far beyond ordinary soldiers. The only person who commanded them was a knight named Lundy. If enough of those holy knights joined together, staging a coup wouldn't be difficult. Gray asked what had happened to them. The informant explained that more than half the holy knights, led by a knight named Lyson, were the ones who started the coup. When all the influential people of Storia gathered in the cathedral, the holy knights who were supposed to guard them suddenly drew their swords and seized control. It had all happened within moments. Gray was amazed at how detailed the informant's account was, as if he had been there himself. The informant laughed, saying merchants tied to the nobles who were executed were being hunted down as well. Gray nodded. So illegal slave owners were in danger too. But he didn't care about Storia's internal affairs, he wanted details about Zanus. The informant said Zanus had escaped into this country with only what he could carry. Gray asked whether those belongings included children. If so, that coincidence worked in his favor. The informant confirmed that the children Zanus brought with him were the hero's family from the Kodarl orphanage, special assets he intended to use. Gray asked whether the slave owner knew that the bishop and Aless had arrived in Bastoke, and if the coup was connected to the hero. There was only one reason someone like Zanus would consider this a moral obligation. Gray wondered if he should simply wait for Zanus to appear, but that wasn't in his nature. Wouldn't it be rude not to greet the slave trader personally, now that the man had come all the way into their territory? Gray smiled darkly. The informant asked if the information had satisfied him. Gray paid the remainder of the fee and the informant said he would be ready for future requests. Gray replied that there were still a few things he needed to know. As he walked home, Gray thought through what he'd learned. Zanus's group had only 3 wagons, one for the merchant, one for the servants, and one for guards. 12 people total, including 5 children. Too many to slip out unnoticed. The informant had discovered the route the wagons planned to take, though he warned that if they changed paths, he couldn't be blamed. Gray had offered 50 gold coins for that information. It wasn't cheap, but saving the children came first. Before going home, Gray stopped at the Valkyrie's residence. Halsaria was surprised to see him. Gray apologized for the sudden visit and said he needed her advice. Halsaria led him toward the meeting room and announced his arrival. When everyone gathered, Gray explained that he wanted to rent a carriage from them. Halsaria remarked that he now looked like a bandit preparing to rob merchants. Gray blinked. The girls teased him, saying that was typical of him. Amelia told him the carriage would be ready by tomorrow morning, and asked him to wait until then. Gray thanked her, admitting he had been relying on her a lot lately. He told them to contact him if they ever needed anything. Amelia said she would. She shut her eyes for a moment, wondering what she should ask for. Gray told her not to get carried away with her wishes. Everyone froze, then all at once rushed over to Amelia, firing questions at her about what had happened between them. They all hoped things had gone well. Amelia tried to explain that they had misunderstood everything, but only Gray had no idea what she was talking about. He simply headed home. The children from the orphanage were alive. Now that he knew that, he considered taking Aless with him when he went after Zanus. Still, he didn't want Storia's people discovering his location. It would be better to handle everything on his own. But that also meant he wouldn't be returning home tomorrow. He needed a proper rest tonight. Gray called out loudly that he was home. The reply came, "Welcome back." He had once been a hero, kind, strong, unyielding. A man with the courage to face any enemy. Someone admired almost every day. But long before that, Gray had simply been a boy in a small village. A 9-year-old with a dagger clutched in his hand, yelling at a wolf to stay away from him. Behind a nearby tree stood a man watching the scene unfold. He knew the beast would devour the boy easily. Better to worry about his own life than risk it for someone else's child. A boy like this wasn't worth a single coin. Children were eaten by monsters all the time. The wolf sprang at Gray. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, shielding his face with his arms. Before the wolf could reach him, it collapsed, killed in a single strike. The man who had been watching had stepped in after all. He muttered to himself that he'd been too lazy to bother earlier, but in the end he couldn't just walk away and let a kid die. Killing one forest wolf was no trouble. Gray opened his eyes, but then an entire pack emerged from the trees. The adventurer cursed under his breath. He called himself an idiot for acting on impulse, but Gray was still sitting on the ground, frozen in fear. The man shouted that the boy had waited too long to run, then rushed into the pack. He cut down several wolves before the rest scattered into the forest. With a heavy exhale, he said the boy was safe. He dropped onto a nearby rock, muttering that he'd nearly given up his soul early today. You shouldn't stick your nose into things you're not used to. Still, if he brought back the wolf's fangs, at least he could afford a drink tonight. Gray walked over and apologized. The adventurer asked why he was still there and told him to go home. If he was attacked again, no one would be there to save him a second time. The man noted that the kid had the face of someone who'd caused trouble. Gray bowed deeply and said, "Thank you very much." He introduced himself as Gray and asked for the name of the man who saved him. The adventurer replied that he was just a D-rank nobody named Rand. There was no need for the kid to remember him, they'd never meet again anyway. Rand stood, went to collect the wolf fangs, and that was the moment Gray made his decision. The moment when death had looked him in the eyes, and he'd been spared by a stranger who had stepped forward without hesitation. Gray never forgot the sight of that man's back as he faced down monsters to protect him. From then on, Gray promised himself that he would become a hero like that someday. A few years have passed, and Rand was still the same D-rank adventurer. After he received the reward from a quest, he proceeded to drink his heart out. The people around him complained about how he's always drinking again after taking an easy job. He's still known as the eternal D-rank adventurer, which they don't want to be like. Rand also wants them to just leave him alone since he's not bothering anyone. When he was still young, he dreamed of becoming a hero, so he became an adventurer, but it didn't go that way. In his journey, he experienced being betrayed, failed some quests, and witnessed friends dying in his arms. He had thought of giving up so many times, but with no other skills, he didn't think he could make it doing anything else other than adventuring. Suddenly, someone called him Drunk Guy. When he turned and saw Gray, he smiled at Rand and said he thought it was really him that he saw. Rand remembered Gray from the time he was about to be attacked by a wolf. Rand was happy to see him again. Gray said that after he saved him, he started learning how to use a sword and how to read and write from folks in his village so he could become a decent adventurer. Gray asked if he could also lend him his wisdom about adventuring when he's free. Rand was shocked about it. He thought it was a pain in the butt to have a kid ask that. Rand told him to first finish his errands and go home after he's finished. Since then, whenever Gray ran some errands, he would find Rand to listen to all sorts of things about adventuring. Rand always acted like it was a nuisance for him, but the truth is that, for him, who had nowhere he belonged, talking to Gray, who was attached to him and always initiated conversation, was not an ordeal. One day, when Rand told Gray he had to pee as their conversation was getting more interesting, Gray told him he drinks too much, but he told Gray to shut his yapping as he's just a kid. As he wobbled on his way to the bathroom, Gray looked at his drink and wondered why he's always drinking the cheapest booze. He tried to sniff it. Suddenly, a guy behind him asked how he'd been talking to Rand a lot lately and what in the world they talked about. Gray answered that he wanted to become an adventurer too, so he's just having Rand teach him all sorts of things. The man smirked and told him he should give up on the guy. Following an eternal D rank like him around, no matter how much talent he has, he could get stuck at D rank too like Rand. Rand saw their interaction but didn't interrupt. Gray said that he doesn't know how respectable of an adventurer he is, but Rand saved him when he was in danger, being attacked by a monster. And Rand didn't hesitate, even though there would be no reward. Gray loudly said that Rand is his role model. Rand was so touched when he heard that from Gray. Rand thought he wouldn't normally put so much weight on just being rescued once, though, but Gray's glare was just too much to handle. The guy walked away and said he was giving him some friendly advice, telling Gray to suit himself. Rand pretended he didn't hear anything when he got back. He apologized that he took so long as the restroom was crowded. Gray said he didn't need to say those things. Rand asked if he still had some time so he could come with him for a bit. Gray asked where they were going. Rand said he's going to teach him the trick to finding medicinal herbs and how to tell them apart. And if he can do that much, he'll always be able to scrape by. Gray was excited to start their lesson. Rand paid the bill while Gray told him to hurry it up, and the two went to a nearby forest. Rand wondered why he was remembering something now, his parents' faces when he first told them that he wanted to be an adventurer. His father even joked if he could become a respectable adventurer and surprise them one day, which he delightfully said yes to. They both cheered him on, but shortly after he became an adventurer, they passed away from an illness. When he was a kid, he believed he'd become a great adventurer without a doubt. Then he turned out like this, broken, giving up on everything, despondent. Rand said he can't face his parents like this, but all of this suddenly changed. Though it might be too late now, he still wanted to give it one more try, and Gray was there to witness it. From then on, Rand worked hard and made it to C rank. However, while on a quest, he saved someone under attack from a strong monster, and the wound he received at that time led to his demise. He was then buried in the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. At that nameless gravestone, the cheap liquor that a certain C-rank adventurer favored was left as an offering every year. Meanwhile, some of the holy knights from Storia were out there looking for Zanus too. According to their information from above, they should soon catch up with their target. Riding the horse were Storia's holy knight's fifth seat Scrad, along with him was a holy knight squire, Meyer. Scrad said that apparently, Zanus hired a wanted spear user as a bodyguard. They have the magic item they were entrusted with, but he advised Meyer not to let his guard down. Meyer smiled, saying he knew that well and told Scrad to trust him. The two holy knights continued to ride to the land of Bastok, and Scrad thought this brat didn't get what he just said. However, Zanus and company also continued to ride to Bastok without knowing the danger they were getting into. Zanus was getting impatient as he wanted to cross the border already, so Storia's pursuit wouldn't so easily be able to get to him. The guard he hired was supposed to be quite capable of guarding him, but he was uncertain how he'd fare against holy knights. In the unlikely event that Knight Commander Ryzen or the Deputy Commander Castor showed up, he knew he was screwed. All this time he had been providing perverted nobles with illegal goods for years, then something like a coup d'etat occurred out of nowhere. In Storia, as it is now, members of the previous establishment with underworld ties are being caught one after another. At this rate, Zanus will be executed too. But he would not allow everything he had worked hard for to come to an end just like that. The reason for the coup is related to the disappearance of the bishop's party, along with the prophesied hero. Of all things, it had to be one of his regulars. But Zanus still had hope for everything. Maybe this was just some bad luck on his journey. Meanwhile, for the kids who used to live with the hero Aless, for just such eventualities, he made sure no one laid a hand on them. Unfortunately, Zanus knew where the bishop's party went and why. A party with holy knights in tow wouldn't go down so easily. The hero, if he could just find a hero, he could use these kids for negotiation. All of a sudden, their carriage stopped. Zanus looked outside and asked if they had caught up. But a mysterious man appeared right in front of them, holding a huge sword with a weird form. One of his guards shouted that it was a bandit, but in an instant, Gray cut his head off. Blood splattered in front of them as Gray looked at Zanus with a very bad intention while his left hand was still in his pocket. Gray got mad that they called him a bandit. He asked if they couldn't tell an adventurer when they saw one in front of them. Zanus looked very shocked, and Gray just stood there staring him dead in the eye. Zanus succumbed in fear at the sight of what happened. But Gray already knew that he had someone who was a former high-ranking adventurer, who had his credentials stripped. Zanus had someone who was an accomplished mercenary whom he paid generously under the table. In the past, he got into trouble with the noble he worked for and killed their private guard, and presently he had a bounty on his head. His capabilities were on par with the Holy Knights, or at least that's what he heard. But Gray thought he had the limited strength of a mere bandit, and it was of no consequence. The guy attacked Gray again thinking he could hit him. Gray nonchalantly parried it and stared at him like he was nothing. But this one was a persistent foe, as he backed up a little then tried a sneak attack on Gray. Unfortunately for him, Gray knew how to read people. He attacked again using his spear and a kick, but Gray blocked both. Zanus thought they had the upper hand in this fight. He knew he was right from the start to hire this guy as his bodyguard, but his expression changed almost instantly. He noticed that the guy was trembling in fear. Now Zanus got terrified and wondered what was happening, thinking they were at the advantage earlier, and Gray just smiled at him. Two guards sneaked up on him from the back, but then they suddenly froze, and Gray finished them off immediately. Zanus didn't understand what was happening right now. It was as if Gray had just turned into a monster with tentacles that looked like chains and was binding everyone around him. Zanus could only watch as Gray finished each of his men, knowing that it would be his turn next. Gray mercilessly put all of them out of their misery. Some of them begged for their lives, but knowing that these people accepted the path of serving a wicked man, he felt no remorse for them as he smiled and sent them to the Shadow Realm while Zanus kept sweating even more. Finally, Gray turned to Zanus, telling him he was the slave merchant who abducted those poor children from the orphanage. Gray said that he was grateful for him offering his own neck, and that he'd have plenty of time for that in the world beyond, so he shouldn't bother confessing or praying to his god. Gray's mission had finally ended, and he thought their numbers matched what the informant told him. He sighed in relief, but he was actually disappointed because the informant said the bodyguard was a skilled one, thinking that spear user was far too weak compared to Lundy. Gray checked what was inside the bags. He found a magic bag that was of higher quality than his and decided he was going to give this to Aless when he got back. There was also valuable medicine, and he took it as an inconvenience fee. But when he went outside, he saw a man with glasses standing there. It was the Holy Knight from Storia, Scrad, and he asked Gray if he was the one responsible for this mess. Gray asked what if he was. With a cold expression, Scrad stared at him and fixed his glasses. He said to Gray that he honestly didn't care what happened to these people, they were going to face the gallows anyway. Gray also knew that this guy had company, and although he couldn't see it, he was sure there was another one here. He thought the other one was using magic or maybe a magic item. Either way, it was troublesome for him. Scrad stared at him again, and Gray thought that if they were just after Zanus, then this might work out somehow. But if he was after the kids, Gray had no choice but to fight. Scrad then apologized for not introducing himself first. He told Gray his name and also that he was a holy knight from Storia. Scrad also told Meyer to show himself and not be rude. Meyer didn't want to show himself, but Gray already had his eyes on him. Scrad warned him again not to disobey his order, given that the Knight Commander asked him to see to his well-being while they were together. Meyer ended up showing himself to Gray and introduced himself as a holy knight too. Gray told them that he's actually an adventurer. Meyer didn't believe him, as well as Scrad, because of his appearance, but Scrad said that doesn't matter, which Meyer declined. Scrad asked Gray if he's after money, and he told Gray that capturing Zanus and his company was actually their job. Gray asked what they would do if he won't tell them. Scrad didn't say a word and was just reading the situation they're in. Scrad made the right decision as he politely asked Gray if he'll take the merchant's corpse, and Gray had no problem with that. He thanked Gray. He was actually surprised the Holy Knight backed off so easily. But Meyer objected to Scrad's method and asked if he's seriously just going to let Gray go like that. Scrad proceeded to get Zanus's remains and told Meyer to just follow his orders. It's their only objective, and now they must return immediately with their report. Their only objective is to capture Zanus or render justice on the spot. Meyer had no choice but to obey him, but he stared at Gray intensely. Scrad got out of the carriage and looked at Gray one more time. Then they carried Dip out while carrying Zanus's remains. Gray wonders what would have happened if he ended up facing those two. He was sure he'd receive collateral damage if that happened. As they walked, Meyer asked Scrad the reason why he let that guy go. Scrad asked him if he really thought he could beat that guy. Meyer said he could obviously, given that nobody can beat 2 holy knights by himself. Especially if it's against Scrad the 5th seat, and with him too, who has the magic item Cloak of Hiding for a sneak attack, thinking the fight would have been a piece of cake for them. But Scrad knows he would have been dead by now if he did that earlier. After all, though he didn't know how he did it, Gray was actually following Meyer's movement almost perfectly, and Meyer didn't notice that at all. If they had fought Gray, even if they'd won, it would have been a great loss, and he himself wouldn't have been guaranteed to survive. He then told Meyer to prepare himself, he's going to hammer him with the basics again when they get back. Gray checks the other carriage and saw the children who are tied up in chains. But he forgot to put away his sword and clean off the blood splatter on his face. Mia shouts, telling him she doesn't care what happens to her, just leave the other children alone. Then Gray told her he's actually here to help them though. Hearing that, Mia felt so relieved, but at the same time confused. Gray's aware how he looks, that even if there's no blood on his face, he would still look like a criminal. So he tried giving them an apple. A girl named Lulu Echo gets near him and asked if she can take it, and she thanked Gray. 1 apple is certainly not enough, so he told them he's gonna get some food from the nearby wagon so all of them can eat. But if they stay here, they'll just fall prey to monsters or bandits. When he mentioned Alessa's name, Mia immediately shouts and asked if he knows Aless. Gray explained everything to them and now he's living with him. Mia was happy that her friend was okay. Gray thought he should have mentioned Aless from the start. Mia introduced herself to Gray and said she and Aless grew up in the same orphanage. Well, they're actually kind of childhood friends. Gray was surprised she actually believed him that easily. He asked if it didn't occur to her that he might actually be trying to deceive her. Mia answered there's no merit in deceiving kids like them. Gray went outside to clean himself up. What Mia said, kids like us, got stuck in his head. He thought that since they were taken from an orphanage and forced into slavery, it makes sense that they have thought so little of themselves. Gray thought he just asked a very stupid question. After Gray had finished cleaning himself, Mia told the kids they're all going with him because Aless is waiting for them in this man's house. The kids seemed to be in high spirits after hearing Aless's name. Aless was like a big brother to them, though Nina apparently sees him as a younger brother. Gray couldn't wait to get home to his kids while he drives the carriage. He stops for a bit to check on the kids. He opened the door and saw them all sleeping soundly. Gray covers them with a blanket when suddenly, some guys outside were yelling at them, telling them that if they behave themselves, they'll let them live. Gray got so pissed that these guys came while the children were sleeping. They continued yelling, telling them to get out as they're getting impatient. One of them said that this wagon was borrowed. Lulu Echo starts to panic and is now mentioning her daddy and mommy while trembling in fear. Mia tried to tell Gray what she experienced in the past, but Gray told her there's no need for that, for it's not something she needs to remember. Gray cast a spell on them, telling them this is all a dream, and everyone went back to sleep. He promised this bad dream will be over once they wake up. Meanwhile, the bandits outside have decided to attack the wagon. But Gray says that from here on out, these guys will meet their maker as he grins. They continued to laugh, not knowing what was about to happen to them. One of them said they shouldn't scare them that much so they would come out. The guards were also useless. They noticed that the carriage looked expensive, and they decided to make all the women inside their slaves instead of selling them. Another bandit yelled, telling them to hurry up and come out. As he tried to get inside the carriage, Gray's huge arm grabbed his head. Gray was really pissed now, for they had been so noisy while the kids were sleeping. He immediately decapitated him cleanly. The others were all shocked and thought Gray was also a bandit like them. One of them said they should just kill this guy. Gray immediately stomped him in the family jewels. He proceeded to finish every one of them, but one of them got away and ran. The one-eyed bandit thought that if he had only known there was a monster like that, no one would have gotten close to that wagon, and now all of his companions were gone. But Gray was already beside him, telling him he wasn't letting him get away. The guy begged, saying he wouldn't lay a hand on them if Gray would just let him go. Gray knew that because of guys like him, children like Lulu Echo increased as they were plundering all this time. Gray, as usual, didn't show any mercy and put the guy out of his misery. Lulu Echo woke up and said she was having a scary dream. Gray went back to the wagon and told them they could sleep now, he'd just wake them up when they got to their destination. They all went back to sleep, while Lulu Echo still wondered what kind of dream she had earlier and proceeded to sleep again. They arrived at Gray's house, and Aless couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mia ran to him. He was so happy that all of them were safe, Mia said that was her line. When he suddenly disappeared from the orphanage, she was so worried for him. The two hugged, and all of them couldn't help but cry at the reunion. Ariamel saw the situation and decided to make a list of things they would need for the additional people who were going to stay. Gray said he was counting on her, while Nina asked if he was happy or something. Gray told her that he was able to rescue Alessa's family, and now they had finally met once again. Gray wondered what was happening to Nina. It turned out she was touched by the reunion and couldn't help herself but cry too. Gray tried to comfort her and pinch her cheeks. But Nina kept on crying even harder. Stella and Lutz went to him too. Nina just wanted Gray to hug her, and he hugged Stella and Lutz as well. Gray apologized for the horrendous things he had committed just for them to be safe. They just wanted Gray to give them hugs all day, but Isuka told them Gray needed to work too, so they could have food on the table. Gray realized that humans are creatures that can endure anything. One can become human only by governing oneself, not yielding to desires, and having a strong will. He just wanted to poke their cheeks so much, but he decided not to give in to his desire. More than that, he couldn't afford to make them sadder. But he thought he needed to apologize to them even more, and that was by pinching their cheeks, so one by one, Gray pinched their cheeks. The little ones couldn't get enough of Gray's pinching and still wanted more. Theo thought these three had completely forgotten that they were in a bad mood lately because Gray didn't go home on time. Theo asked Isuka if he wanted to be pinched by Gray too. Theo said she didn't mind because she wasn't that old yet, but she noticed Isuka had been looking enviously since earlier. Theo said it wasn't strange that they wanted to be spoiled by their dad at their age. Isuka thought Theo was right, and Theo told Isuka they should go to Gray now. So they got their cheeks poked by their father figure. Nina kept asking Gray if he was happy right now that he got to pinch their cheeks, even the older ones. Gray replied that he was very much happy now. Alessa called him and said he already knew what happened from Mia. He thanked Gray for helping all of them and for letting them stay there. Gray said he didn't need to worry about it, it was only natural to help his family when they were in trouble. Hearing that, Alessa smiled, and the gloomy look he had seemed to disappear. Gray still wondered what kind of lives these children would live in this world. He thought perhaps there was an extremely harsh future waiting ahead of them. But he promised himself he would brush off all the sparks that fell on these children. He wanted to walk through the rest of his life with them, even if that future only lay beyond a mountain of corpses and a river of blood. Ariamel returned with the list of what Gray needed to buy, some food, dishes, and some beddings too. Gray thanked her, and now he headed out to buy all of it while returning to the carriage with the Valkyrie. Ariamel told him to be careful, while Nina didn't want him to go yet. Theo noticed something on Ariamel's face and asked why she was puffing up her cheeks. Embarrassed, Ariamel ran back to the kitchen and told Theo she'd prepare dinner, but they didn't have enough ingredients yet, so how could she prepare? Another thought stuck in Theo's mind. Isuka wondered what she was thinking this time. She then told Isuka, "What if we form a dad's cheek poke squad together with Ariamel?" And Isuka immediately declined. Gray went to the Valkyrie's hideout to return the carriage he borrowed. He was thinking about what he should say to apologize for the damage it took from the bandits. Halsaria suddenly popped out of the window like a monkey and called him. Gray told her that he was here to return the carriage. Halsaria said that Amelia and Kasha were probably still in the room, and she asked if he wanted to talk to them. Gray answered if that was okay. She told him to come and wait for them in the conference room, then she disappeared immediately like some kind of lizard. Gray walked inside, and some of the members of the Valkyrie saw him and were disgusted by his presence. One of them asked why he was here, but he didn't mind it. He knew that some members were still cold towards him. They used to be guys who were more openly hostile, but he hadn't seen them lately. Amelia and Kasha went to meet Gray, and they also brought some cookies. They apologized for keeping him waiting, but Gray said it was all right. Kasha said she wasn't really worried at all since it was Gray, and it seemed his mission went well too. Gray said that all the children were safe now and they would be living with them in his house. He told them that he encountered 2 holy knights. Amelia asked what those holy knights said. Meanwhile, Halsaria was already asleep and wasn't able to eat even one cookie. Kasha said that from what she had heard, the holy knight with glasses seemed to be quite skilled, and maybe he was stronger than the person he killed before. Halsaria asked if she was talking about the guy whom Gray castrated before he finished him. Kasha asked what she meant by castrated, but Halsaria said it was Gray's doing. He then said that it was her who actually shot an arrow at Lundy's crotch, but Halsaria said it was him who ordered her to do it. Kasha admitted she was an idiot for asking. Gray explained that on his way back, he was attacked by bandits and the carriage was damaged, and for that he apologized. Amelia understood him. Gray wanted to talk about the repair costs, but Kasha told him he didn't need to pay them money, but something else. She then told Gray that he needed to pay with his body. Hearing that, Amelia was so shocked that she almost lost consciousness while mentioning Kasha's name. Gray told them that because of the children, he couldn't handle requests that took too much time. Kasha said that was totally fine because she just wanted Gray to help her with something, but she didn't mean to say it like that. She would tell him the details next time, and Gray said to just call him when she was ready. Kasha grinned while thinking about how she should get Amelia and Gray alone next time. Halsarian noticed that she was making a funny face and thought maybe she was planning something weird. As Gray was walking back to his house, he was thinking about the favor Kasha was asking regarding the damaged carriage, especially since it was Kasha. He thought that girl was planning something strange. He just hoped that only the children's faces were swelling up and not something else. He stopped at the market and the fruit vendor greeted him. Gray apologized that he didn't come yesterday, but the man said he had nothing to worry about. They had good apples today, and Gray wanted to buy 2 of them. He remembered what Aless said, that in the orphanage, they would only get fruit for dessert on special days. Gray decided to buy 8 pieces. For him, today was a special day. He would cut them all up and serve them as dessert after the meal. He would give Lutz the apple as is, but he could watch him happily munching on an apple forever, though Ariamel would get angry if he fed him too much. His next target was bedding, and speaking of which, those kids from the Kodarl orphanage were still wearing tattered clothes, and he wondered if there were enough rooms for them. But more than anything, he needed to hear what those kids really wanted. It annoyed him, but he thought he should consult the innkeeper on this matter. He went back home, and Ariamel thanked him for purchasing all that they needed. Then she asked Gray if he would like some tea. Gray said yes. He entered the room and saw all of them. He noticed that they were somehow split into 2 groups. It was natural that becoming friends suddenly was difficult. He told Mia that they could stay here if they wanted, they could live here as is while they thought about their future, and Mia thanked him for that. One of the kids tried to reach the vegetables, so Gray decided to prepare dinner. Mia asked Gray and Ariamel if she could help too. Gray looked at Ariamel. Ariamel said that it was quite painful not being able to do anything at times like this. Then she tasked Mia to cut the vegetables, which she accepted immediately. Another kid also wanted to help. Fio called Nina, Stella, and Lutz so they could set the dishes. The other kids wanted to do something too, so Fio told Nina, Stella, and Lutz to help them so they wouldn't drop the dishes. Gray observed them interacting with one another. Isuka said maybe they were just ornaments at this point. Gray said they would just leave it to them for now as they were at the moment. Isuka then asked where Aless was. Aless was just there right next to him. Even Gray was surprised that he didn't notice his presence at all. He thought this kid had the skill to conceal his presence, which was really valuable. Another mushroom grew on his head as he spoke, saying he wasn't happy at all, but his face said the opposite. Aless decided maybe he should bring a desk and a chair from the storage room.